Decisions, as the gallant member will know, are made on operational factors. Force protection is at its highest level in the Eastern Mediterranean. The decision about HMS Dragon was brought to the Chief of the Defence Staff and Ministers in light of the increasingly reckless and indiscriminate attacks by Iran across the region, and it was signed off immediately.
Lorna McAvoy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for all the work that he's doing in this ever-changing situation. Can the Minister offer some advice to my constituents, the Samuels family and their 2 children who are in Dubai at the moment? They are not able to get proper advice from the airlines as to what options are available to them, and I wondered if he could elaborate on the work that he's been doing with the airlines where commercial flights are taking place, and are they prioritising on need and vulnerability? My department would be very happy to take up the specifics of my honourable friend's case. In general, in relation to the airlines, they are seeking to manage a very complex caseload. We're grateful for their work with us. The British government is obviously prioritising our most vulnerable nationals and encouraging commercial partners to do the same.
Tom Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to add my thanks as well to the Minister, government officials and also all of our casework teams who are dealing with our constituents on this issue. I too have many people who have been affected and have encouraged them to register to the scheme as well. I'm particularly concerned about vulnerable people with health conditions that I know have already been raised. I understand they will be prioritised for flights to repatriate them. One of my constituents is hoping to be on a flight tomorrow morning. She has a heart condition and is going to run out of medication at some point. The Minister said that they're hoping to get medication into these countries too. I wondered if you'd be able to elaborate on that and give reassurance to constituents like mine who are understandably concerned about their health conditions and the management of them while this situation continues.
I understand for British nationals not at home with medical conditions, they will be worried about whether they can get access to the medicines that they require. The vast majority of British nationals are in the United Arab Emirates, where there are good supplies of all reasonable medicines that people would want access to. But if there are particular concerns, be in touch with my officials, and we will work to make sure that British nationals who need medicine and are not able to get access to them, to those medicines on their own, that they are supported to do so. Some of my officials have, for example, helped take British nationals to pharmacies, etc.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for his statement and all the work the Government is doing to try to help UK citizens get home where they wish to. One of my constituents, a type 1 diabetic, is in Dubai with friends and she's running out of insulin and anxious to return home. Would he be able to offer any guidance on whether she can be prioritised for a flight home and what medical support she can access in the interim? And could he also offer advice to other constituents of mine, including Crystal Wymont, also currently unable to leave Dubai due to flights being cancelled on more than one occasion, and who are finding it difficult to access support when they contact the UK consulate in Dubai due to a heavy workload, clearly, that the consulate are experiencing?
I thank my honourable friend for his question and the care he shows to his constituents. On the medical questions, I think I covered that in my previous answer. I wouldn't want, of course, and as my honourable friend generously acknowledged, the teams on the ground are under considerable pressure. I recognise for British nationals they will be frustrated when there are delays in getting through to our teams, but I just want to reassure people our hotline is open 24/7. They will speak to Foreign Office staff when they get through. I'm keeping a close eye on waiting times to get through. I know that this is not going to all be smooth sailing and that we're going to encounter all manner of issues and glitches, but we will do everything we can to minimise those and work as quickly as we can to get everybody home safely.
Josh Babarende.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A statement on consular assistance is no time for party political attacks. It does a disservice to the hard-working officials like Sarah Taylor, who has been doing amazing work, and it does a disservice to our constituents who are stuck abroad. I'm pleased to report to the Minister that Cameron, the individual who I raised with the Prime Minister in this chamber earlier this week, who was stuck in a hospital in Dubai, is now back home in London, safe. But I want to raise the plight of another constituent, Donna, who I spoke to the Minister about yesterday. Donna has attempted to board 6 flights back from the United Arab Emirates back to London, but each of them have been cancelled. She has a number of health conditions, she has run out of medication, and she cannot get that medication or its equivalent in the United Arab Emirates. What can the Minister do to support us, one, to get an alternative medication that she needs, and two, to get Donna back home to Eastbourne safe?
I thank the honourable member for his tone, his question, and the welcome news about Cameron being home safely. I know he's been in touch directly with our excellent Director for Consular Affairs, who will be red in the face at being in Hansard unexpectedly, and we will do everything we can to make sure Donna gets the assistance that she needs.
Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With family that have been living in the UAE for a number of years, I know how worrying it is for many families here and there, so I wanted to put on record my thanks to the Minister for his work and those of his officials in providing consular assistance. I wanted to raise a case of a particular constituent who's been in touch, who was on his way to transit in Kuwait and has now found that Kuwaiti Airways are no longer paying for their accommodation and seemingly providing very little help. So I just wanted to ask what more they could be doing, what I could be doing to support them, and what other support is available to them, and what work we're doing with the commercial airlines to ensure that they are providing the right support to people like my constituent.
I thank my honourable friend for the question. We are working directly with airlines, and I'm sure my honourable friend is putting these points to my officials, and we will follow up.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for his answers, and also to the Minister and his department. I had some constituents who worked for Shorts Bombardier. They were in Malaysia. They were returning home to the Middle East, coming back to Northern Ireland, and obviously found themselves restricted by the events that were taking place there and only able to travel. They got home last night, so I want to put on record my thanks to the Minister and his department. Minister, there are 138,000 British people who have registered their presence in the Middle East. Get them home is one thing, but making sure they're safe when they're there. Can I ask the Minister what's done to make sure, because families are worried sick, to make sure the family want to know that their loved ones are safe? Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his important question. I am conscious particularly of those from Northern Ireland have a slightly different process depending on whether or not they have a British passport on them for signing up to Ministerial presence. We've clarified the process in relation to that, and if there are any questions, please do refer them to the Foreign Office. The honourable member is right to talk about the risks in the region. That's why we're providing such updated travel advice to ensure British nationals are aware of them. But of course, we are taking concrete actions too. I can confirm to the House that we have been actively disrupting threats over the last few days. That includes the RAF Typhoon Squadron jointly with Qatar, which has been shooting down drones over Qatar. RAF F-35B Lightnings shooting down uncrewed aerial systems over Jordan. And British counter-uncrewed aerial systems teams neutralising drones in Iraqi airspace heading towards coalition forces. Britain will take active action to defend our people, our interests, and of course our friends and partners in the region.
Adam Jurgey.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement and associate myself with his condolences to the family of those who have been killed, his tone today, and thank him for summoning the Iranian ambassador yesterday, who I hope was left in no doubt both about our values and our resolve. Now, I acknowledge the work to get those stuck in the Middle East at home, but my constituent and his family from Newcastle Lyme, Madam Speaker, are stuck because their flights through the Middle East have been cancelled twice. The next available flight, I've been told, they were told this morning, is the 24th of March, and their travel agent has said to them that the family must pay for their accommodation between today and the 24th of March at about £1,000 a night for the next almost 3 weeks, which is £20,000 or so. So notwithstanding what the Minister has said today, can I urge him to go further and much, much faster in ensuring that airlines and agents don't leave people in the lurch, don't take advantage and don't let them down?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I can confirm I did leave the Iranian ambassador with no doubt about the British position and resolve. In relation to his constituents, please be in touch. It sounds like they're not in the region and that there's a particularly expensive set of hotel bills facing them. It'd be easier for me to get into the details with a little bit more detail following a conversation with officials.
Terry Jeremy.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement today. Can I invite the Minister to join me in paying tribute to the pilots and other service personnel based at RAF Marham in my constituency? It was the F-35s based there that were engaged in action this week to protect British citizens and support our allies, and I pay tribute to their skills, expertise and dedication.
I do, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, join him in his tribute to RAF Marham. I would also have to mention RAF Waddington, a vital airbase in my own constituency, which are also providing a considerable contribution. I know the whole House will be thinking of our armed forces as they keep our people, our interests and our allies protected in these tense days.
And the final question on this statement, John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My thoughts are with British citizens in the Gulf, and as someone who's lived in that region and worked there, I can only imagine how concerned they must be. The opposition frontbenchers yesterday and today have used careless, aggressive and disrespectful language in this chamber, and I imagine they're doing so in order to wrap themselves in the cloak of national security patriotism. But does my honourable friend agree with me that this use of language actually undermines national security, because it suggests that this House is divided on such an important issue? And I'd like to pay tribute to his diplomats, our incredibly brave armed forces and other civil servants in this country who are dealing with this crisis. And as they deal with it, they would benefit, I think, from a united House of Commons.
I agree very much with the tone of my honourable friend's questions. When I look behind me, I do not see orcs and goons. I see honourable friends concerned about their constituents, and I know the same is true across all of these benches.
And that concludes this statement. We now move on to the next statement, and I'll give the front benches just a few moments to cross over. Statement, Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, with permission, I would like to make a statement about the situation in energy markets in light of the unfolding conflict in Iran and the Middle East. I want to start by saying my thoughts are with British citizens and those across the world affected by the events of recent days, and I want to thank members of our armed forces serving in the region and elsewhere. Let me update the House on the situation in global oil and gas markets and the impact on the UK. In the days since the conflict began, we've seen Iran target energy production and export infrastructure across the Gulf. Traffic in the Strait of Hormuz, through which around 20% of global oil and LNG is shipped, has declined very significantly, and the Iranian regime has issued reckless and unjustified threats to all ships using it. LNG production has also been halted in Qatar following unjustified and indiscriminate Iranian attacks at the start of the week. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK benefits from strong and diverse energy supplies, including our own North Sea production, pipelines with Norway, interconnectors with continental Europe, and 3 LNG terminals. While Qatar is a major supplier of LNG globally, last year it provided the UK with 1% of our gas supply. I've been in touch with National Gas and NESO, who are confident about our security of supply. On oil, we hold substantial emergency and commercial stocks and stand ready to work with the International Energy Agency to support the stability of oil markets if needed. As when Russia invaded Ukraine, though, we will be exposed to price competition in international oil and gas markets, which is pushing up wholesale prices as other countries seek to replace lost supplies from the region. And this reflects our position, regardless of our domestic production, as a price taker, not a price maker in these markets, leaving us exposed to their volatility, no matter where the fossil fuels come from. The government continues to monitor the situation closely and work with our international partners. In recent days, I've had multiple conversations with the Executive Director of the IEA, as well as with my counterparts in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the EU, and our major UK oil and gas producers. I'll be having further calls with our international allies and partners over the coming days. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a fast-moving situation, and we continue to work with our allies to seek to minimise the impact of disruption to markets and support the safe passage of oil and gas across the world. I know families and businesses across the country will see these global events and be concerned about the impact on their energy bills and the cost of living. It's important to say the energy price cap will provide protection for households until the start of July, regardless of developments in the Middle East. And last week, Ofgem confirmed that as a result of the Chancellor's decisions in the budget, the price cap will fall by 7%, or £117 annually, for the period covering April to June. The price cap for that period is fixed and will not change. And it's a direct result of the decisions of my right honourable friend the Chancellor to raise taxes on the wealthiest in the budget to cut bills for families across Britain. In addition to this, around 6 million families are benefiting from our expansion of the £150 Warm Homes discount, and we're delivering the biggest investment in home upgrades in British history through our Warm Homes plan to cut bills and shield families from these kind of fossil fuel shocks. On business and industry, we're taking action to expand the British Industry Supercharger from April to reduce costs for the most energy-intensive businesses, and a significant proportion of businesses are on fixed-term contracts, which shield them from market volatility for the contract duration. However, we do recognise that at the point of contracting, businesses are exposed to international fossil fuel markets. And clearly, for both businesses and consumers, much will depend on the length of time for which this crisis lasts. On Tuesday, in her spring statement, my right honourable friend the Chancellor reaffirmed her commitment to prioritise families and businesses, whatever turbulence we see around the world. She showed her determination to act on bills at the budget last year, and as we continue to monitor the effects of these events, the House and the country should be in no doubt that the Prime Minister's #1 priority is to tackle the cost of living crisis that affects families across Britain. However long this crisis lasts, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, we must learn the right long-term lessons. The events of recent days are yet another reminder that the only route to energy security and sovereignty for the UK is to get off our dependence on fossil fuel markets, whose prices we do not control, and onto clean, homegrown power that we do. Just several weeks ago, some people were suggesting we should gamble on low fossil fuel prices and cancel the AR7 renewables auction. When I made my statement on that auction, I warned the House that people can have incredibly short memories, given that we're just 4 years on from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I warned at the time it was a foolish and dangerous gamble to bet on geopolitical stability at a time of greater geopolitical instability than at any time for generations. I warned the opposition had failed to learn the lessons from the Ukraine crisis, which caused the worst cost of living crisis in memory. And I warned that a dogma of opposing clean energy would damage this country and risk families and businesses being left to pick up the bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, the events of recent days have unfortunately shown why this would be such a dangerous and reckless strategy, and we will continue to reject it. Instead, our AR7 renewables auction alone will supply enough homegrown, secure, clean power for the equivalent of 16 million homes. Power we will not have to source from the international gas market, power that will not be at the mercy of international events, power over which we, not fossil fuel markets, have control. Of course, our North Sea production continues to play a very important and valuable role in our energy system. But as we learn the right lessons of this crisis, this government will not succumb to the false arguments peddled by some. The maturing basin accounts for less than 0.7% of global oil and gas production. New exploration licences are completely marginal to that basin and would make no difference to the prices set by international markets and paid by UK bill payers. More UK production wouldn't reduce the global price of gas. Not my words, but the words of the former Minister for Energy, Greg Hands, in 2022, in the midst of the last energy crisis. And indeed, the Shadow Energy Secretary herself said in 2023, new licences, and I quote, wouldn't necessarily bring energy bills down. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this government has taken the decision to keep existing fields open for their lifetime, including through transitional energy certificates in our North Sea Future Plan, as called for and welcomed by industry, and also the decision not to issue new licences to explore new fields, as the science tells us is the right thing to do, because this government will not ignore the biggest long-term threat multiplier to our security and stability that we face, the climate crisis. For us on this side, as the Prime Minister said yesterday, the lesson of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the lesson of recent days is that the only route to greater energy independence for Britain is our mission, and we will double down on it. Because every solar panel we install, every wind turbine we put up, every nuclear power station we build makes us more secure as a country and protects families and businesses from these kind of energy shocks. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government has learned the lessons of the geopolitical instability we have seen and continue to see. In an unstable world, we will keep driving for energy sovereignty and abundance with clean homegrown power. We will not gamble with the British people's money in the fossil fuel casino and ignore the lessons of the past. We have shown a determination to act to help families, and we will continue to do so. And we will work with our allies and partners to defend our national interest and seek to bring this conflict to an end for the benefit of citizens at home and the stability of the world. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. Madam Deputy Speaker, the events in the Middle East this past week have shown why it is so vital that the government is doing all it can to ensure that UK businesses and households have a secure, reliable supply of dispatchable energy, a supply that we can rely on. Affordable energy is vitally important, but as important is security of supply. There was nothing new in the Secretary of State's statement today. No actions, just notes of some meetings. There were actions and there are actions he can take, and he could take them now, both for supplies and for bills. No matter how much the Green Lobby or the Secretary of State wishes the UK could end its reliance on oil and gas overnight, we cannot. 40% of the UK's energy comes from gas. It's the UK's single biggest energy source. 24 million UK homes and 500,000 businesses are connected to the gas grid. Currently, 43% of the gas used in the UK is produced in our North Sea basin. It is a vital energy source. Every molecule of gas produced by the UK in the North Sea is piped onto our shores and into our grid. The oil produced comes onshore either here or to Europe to be refined. It does not and cannot get caught in the Straits of Hormuz or elsewhere. It is a secure supply of oil for the UK. Our North Sea oil and gas sector has been, is and should remain vital for our national security and as a national security resource for many years. It is a resource that the government and this Secretary of State is actively trying to shut down, however. The GMB Scotland Secretary has called his plans delusional and mean that we are facing, and I quote, the most destructive industrial calamity in the nation's history, a disaster risking jobs, communities, even higher bills, and our energy security. That's from the GMB Scotland Secretary. The North Sea oil and gas industry and its workforce must be protected. He knows that this is the workforce and these are the supply chains which will, if still here, deliver the rollout of technologies like wind and nuclear into the future. The Secretary of State must overturn his ban on new oil and gas licences. Will he? He must immediately give confidence to the industry that they have a future in the North Sea by finally granting Jackdaw and Rosebank. What is taking so long? And to kickstart investment and to stem the accelerating fall in production and to secure the skilled workforce and supply chains, he must, with the Treasury, end the energy profits levy now. Nuclear is the UK's route to energy security. Nuclear works in the winter, can run 24/7 and is at latest prices worldwide shows it can be much cheaper too. But as the Secretary of State knows, our existing plants are nearing the end of life and the government is stalling on actions to replace or renew new gigawatt-scale sites. They have ruled out large-scale nuclear at Willow and dropped the previous Conservative government's 24-gigawatt target. In light of current events, does the Secretary of State accept that not granting a new gigawatt-scale plant at Willow, arguably the best site in the country for a large-scale plant, was a huge missed opportunity? We are still waiting for the government to accept recommendations from the Fingleton Review, which will make nuclear cheaper and easier to build. When will he do so, and will he do so in full? And I will briefly touch on the absolute Luddite approach to energy that the SNP have in Scotland. They tried to talk a good game and to sound like they support energy workers, energy generation and energy investment, but that's an illusion. They've got a ban on new nuclear, still a presumption against new oil and gas, and they're happy to coat the countryside in pylons and turbines and batteries, but have no plan whatsoever for when the wind doesn't blow. The Secretary of State last year signed a secret energy deal with China, and he doesn't like it to be called a secret, but what other word can there be when he refused to publish details month after month, and he only published it after sustained pressure from my right honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State for Energy. And it's no surprise he wanted to keep it a secret, agreeing to cooperate with China, a known threat, on batteries, on cables, on inverters, on turbines, effectively giving a nation that is known to have interfered in numerous sovereign states and has placed kill switches in energy infrastructure it has exported, giving them access to our energy grid. That is at best foolish and at worst reckless. Whatever you call it, it is another threat to our energy security. Madam Deputy Speaker, businesses are struggling with sky-high energy prices and households are bracing themselves for energy bills that may rise significantly this year. The Conservatives' Clean Power Plan would reduce bills by 20%. The Secretary of State could take that action today. Will he adopt our cheap power plan?
Let me answer her questions, which I will do in a moment. I do say to the honourable lady, though, that I think the biggest question for this House and the country is, do we learn the lessons of these crises? You know, half of the recessions that have happened since the 1970s have been caused by fossil fuel price spikes. And we all face a choice, which is we can either learn the lessons of these crises and drive to clean homegrown power, which actually, to be fair, at some points used to be the policy of the last Conservative government, or we can pretend that those lessons don't exist and we can keep repeating the same mistake again and again. And I fear that what's happened to the Conservative Party since the general election is having already sort of gone halfway away from that important lesson, they've now gone fully away from it. And that takes me to the answer to her questions. On nuclear, we're doing the biggest nuclear building programme for half a century. We're doing all of the things that the last government promised and never delivered. Where were they with Sizewell C? They said they'd have agreement in the last Parliament. They didn't. We're doing it. Where were they with SMRs? We're actually doing it. Yes, we will publish the details of Fingleton shortly, and it will be an important step forward on regulation of our industry, which they never did. On the North Sea, I think she said it's an incredibly important resource, which is exactly what I said in my statement. And indeed, we listened to the industry and took a pragmatic approach on tiebacks to existing fields, welcomed by the industry, to keep our manifesto commitment of keeping existing oil and gas fields open for their lifetime. But I do just want to pause on this point about new exploration licences, Madam Deputy Speaker, because she raises it. The truth is, as everybody knows, new exploration licences, particularly in the light of tiebacks, will make no difference to production. And here's the really important thing about this, which is it's on average 10 years from exploration to production. And there's a very important report that came out from NESO on gas security of supply last year. What did it say was the biggest single thing we could do for security of supply is to drive towards a clean energy transition. Because the more we fail to do that, the more we are exposed, given that the North Sea is a declining basin that has seen production fall by 75% in the last 25 years and 70,000 jobs lost under them. On the windfall tax, I think I do want to take up this point. The Chancellor says she wants the windfall tax to end, but obviously she has to look at the current circumstances. Now, I notice the Conservative Party now disavows their decision to introduce the windfall tax. The windfall tax has raised £12 billion since 2022 because of supernormal profits, because of the profits that were going from our constituents into the pockets of oil and gas companies. So it's all very easy saying now, well, we shouldn't have done the windfall tax. Well, first of all, they did, but actually I think it was the right thing to do. So, look, absolutely my Honourable Friend the Chancellor listens closely to the industry, indeed was talking to them yesterday on these issues. But I think it is important to recognise these other issues. On the EIA process, we're going to follow the right process. I'll tell her why, because we want to make sure it is legally watertight and it isn't subject to an endless judicial review. And actually, that's what the industry itself wants. I'll just return to the original point, Madam Deputy Speaker. On China. Well, he says on China. So I said last week it was a wacky internet conspiracy theory, and they said, well, no, it isn't. So why didn't you publish it? So I did. And now they've got nothing to say, truthfully. And not only did we publish our memo, but I'm glad to say we published theirs from 2015. What did that show? That we were going to get the Chinese to build nuclear power stations for us. Oh, for goodness' sake! So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do urge all members of this House: look at the facts, look at the evidence, learn the right lessons.
The Select Committee, Bill Lesterson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, the Energy Select Committee looked at the facts and looked at the evidence. We had the regulator Ofgem and we had the energy systems operator NESO telling us that the price cap will be in place till June as a short-term protection, that indeed Clean Power 2030 is the best way to avoid future exposure to the sorts of risks that we are now experiencing, that GDP, as a share of GDP, energy costs will fall from their current 10% to 5 to 6% by 2050, according to government plans, and that there is no prospect of bringing down prices by activity in the North Sea. But can I ask him what plans he has to give further short-term support to bill payers? We heard evidence about the reformed national pricing consultation underway at the moment. So can I encourage him to bring that forward so that bill payers can benefit from the availability of low-demand, cheap electricity as soon as possible as an immediate response to this crisis? Yeah.
My honourable friend speaks very wisely on these issues, and I agree with what he said about how we get energy security and the right thing to do. I just want to say on the question of bill payers, across government and indeed I'm sure across the House, we are incredibly alive and vigilant about these potential impacts. And I do think it's very, very important, and there is, I think, cross-party support for this. I think it is very important we have the price cap, because in a world without the price cap, we would see much more immediate effects. That doesn't mean to say that everyone is protected, but a lot of people, vast majority of people domestic consumers are protected by the price cap. On his point about shorter-term action, including through the RNP, as he said, look, across my department, as he can imagine, there is intensive work underway to look at all the options that we have. Much of this, as the regulator said to him yesterday, will depend on how long the crisis lasts. But I think the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have both shown their willingness and determination to act on bills, and I'm sure that will remain the case.
Perhaps spokesperson for Palliative.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So the conflict in the Middle East reminds us again how dangerously exposed the UK is to volatile global fossil fuel markets. And on the basis of forecasts by the Roundtree Foundation showing that just as happened after Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, rather than going down, energy bills could go up dramatically, placing further pressure on families and businesses struggling whilst energy companies make profits. My honourable friend, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, asked the Prime Minister yesterday to give a cast-iron guarantee to not let energy bills rise by £500 this year. He did not, so I will ask the Secretary of State instead, will he give that guarantee? And we must ask, why are we so exposed? It's our heavy reliance on gas, limited storage capacity, dependence on imports and falling domestic liquefied natural gas inventories. Yet as recently as January, the Conservatives were arguing in favour of continued reliance on gas due to the price falling at that time. It's taken less than 2 months for them to be proven wrong. Meanwhile, Mr Speaker, given the instability in European energy markets caused by the ongoing conflict, I'm glad to hear that the Secretary of State has engaged with energy counterparts in the EU and would like to hear more details of their analysis of potential impacts on supply, prices and regional energy security. Thank you.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady for her questions, and obviously I agree with her on the sort of fundamental point that she was making about why we are exposed. Let me say, on the question of cost of living support, these are obviously matters for the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, but I just want to sort of reiterate to her the Chancellor showed a willingness to act on these issues in the budget. Because she recognised the pressures that families were facing and that the cost of living crisis is by far the biggest issue facing our country. And the Prime Minister, again, Prime Minister's questions, reiterated the fact that we were keeping a very, very careful monitoring of this situation. And look, obviously, I think the government has shown its willingness to intervene, and if necessary, we will indeed intervene again. On her sort of the wider points that she makes, I think the most important thing I can emphasise to her is that we've got to go back to the fundamentals here, which is driving forward with clean power, driving forward with the insulation of homes, and indeed on the European counterparts that she asks about, they are facing similar challenges. And she is absolutely right that cooperation with our European colleagues, and indeed through the IEA, we are obviously all engaged on some of these questions that I raised in my statement around oil stocks. Cooperation with our European colleagues is particularly vital at this time.
Graham Downey.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for a very measured and clear statement this afternoon. Can I ask him two particular points? One, can we make sure that if we do see rises in bills coming in forthcoming months, we make sure that the blame for that is firmly placed where it should be, which is the actions of the Iranian government by attacking and threatening the Strait of Hormuz? That's right. That's right. Second, can I ask him, at the Select Committee meeting yesterday, we heard from the Chief Executive of Ofgem that a prolonged period of time of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz would create an upward pressure on prices. He indicated during that evidence that the market was anticipating roughly 2 weeks is something that they could manage. Does he have any sense of what prolonged period of time might mean that would create that upward pressure as the conflict continues to develop? And will he ensure that the Select Committee and the House is kept informed as that progresses?
Can I thank him for his two excellent questions? Look, on the first point, he is absolutely right about this. I spoke to my counterpart, the Qatari Energy Minister, and it was the attacks on their LNG terminals and indeed understandable fears for their workforce caused by indiscriminate Iranian attacks that led to him make the decisions it is. It is Iranian threats to the Strait of Hormuz which is preventing the passage of shipping, and I think he's absolutely right to emphasise that point. On his point about how long the conflict lasts, I won't speculate on that. But he's right to say that the longer the conflict goes on, obviously the more impact there will be on bill payers and indeed on our economy. That's why it's in all of our interests for this conflict to come to an end as soon as possible. And on his point about keeping the House informed and indeed the Select Committee, I undertake to do that.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Representing as I do the Brigg-in-Immingham constituency, I recognise that the renewable energy sector is attracting investment and jobs into the area. But I also have thousands of people who work in energy-intensive industry, and their jobs are increasingly at risk. As with everything, compromise and balance is important. Could I urge the Secretary of State to recognise that energy costs for industry are crippling many businesses, and that we must do something to address that?
I want to say to the honourable gentleman, I absolutely recognise the challenges that many businesses face, even before the crisis, because even before the crisis began, it's important to say that fossil fuel prices were still 40% higher than before Russia invaded Ukraine. and businesses were facing the impacts of that. Now, of course, we're taking action this April on the supercharger, but that is only for 500 or so of the most energy-intensive businesses. We're taking action next April on the British Industry Competitiveness Scheme. That's for 7,000 businesses. But I really want to say I recognise the point that he makes. And just as we are working and looking across government at the situation that households face, so indeed I was talking to my colleague, the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, Business and Trade yesterday, we're looking at the impact on businesses as well.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend's absolutely right to expose the utter folly of responding to the situation that faces us by saying what we need to do is to stop with renewables and invest more in oil and gas. It would be utter madness to learn that lesson. When we had the huge price spike as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the fact whether oil and gas was coming from the UK made no difference to the amount that our consumers paid, because it all was on the global markets. So my right honourable friend is absolutely right on that. But does he agree with me that the marginal pricing system, which was set up in a time when 80–90% of gas was being generated by fossil fuels, is far less robust at a time when we're down to 40% on gas and shrinking the entire time, over 50% coming from renewable sources now? And should we now be looking at the fact that because renewables are cheaper, we should have the benefit from that, rather than a system that, even if we only have 1% of gas, allows that to set the price?
Secretary of State.
I'll take that last bit of the question. I agree with the first part of his question, and I'll be as brief as I can be, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the marginal pricing question, which is the challenge. Look, the thing I would say to him is I completely understand the logic of where he's going with this question. Now, one of the benefits of a clean power system is that gas will set the price much less of the time. And one of the benefits of moving from the RO, renewables obligation, to CFDs is that that gives you a fixed price, not subject to the marginal price of gas. Now, the principle that he's espousing is one I'm sympathetic to. The truth is, though, there are significant obstacles to getting to what he wants to see in a timely way and in a way that is better for bill payers. But of course, among all other things, this is something our department continues to look at.
Vera Hophouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Energy Security Net Zero Select Committee is running an inquiry into the cost of energy, as we have already heard from the Chair. And with due respect, Madam Deputy Speaker, I cannot understand how the Conservative opposition can, with a straight face, deplore the cost of energy for bill payers, while at the same time advocating prolonging our dependency on oil and gas, which is precisely which keeps our energy bills high. But coming back to our inquiry, we heard from one of our witnesses from E3G that there could be costs of up to £500 per household in hidden profits due to the intransparent network charges put onto energy bills. Will the government ensure that bill payers are given the full picture of the breakdown of profits across the energy sector?
Well, I thank her for her question and the point she makes. It's worth saying, by the way, that Lord Brown, formerly of BP, was on the radio yesterday, precisely making the same point that she did and I did. This is a man who used to run one of the world's largest oil and gas companies, who said, look, the lesson of this crisis, we've got to get onto clean power. On her point about networks, I think it is important to be transparent about it. It's also important to bear down on these costs, and that's something, obviously, I discuss a lot with the regulator.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend talks about lessons learned, and despite my youthful good looks, I actually recall the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the last Iranian Revolution. And of course that led to a fuel crisis globally. It is the reason why what we're doing the importance of it is underlined by the need for the energy transition and improving our domestic energy resilience. Why we need to see more renewables, why we need to roll out Rolls-Royce small modular reactors urgently and take a lead globally on that. My right honourable friend talked about household support. What do you think, does he think that President Trump was thinking in terms of what impact this would have on businesses and the humble motorist?
I'll start by saying that my honourable friend was obviously a precocious 5-year-old in 1979, Madam Deputy Speaker, with a great knowledge of politics and an interest in it. I won't speculate on the last part of his question. I do think what my honourable friend said about the indiscriminate Iranian attacks is really an important point to underline. The fundamental point he makes about driving forward with renewables, nuclear, all of those things that get us off these markets is surely the lesson that we must all learn from this crisis.
Sir Julian Smith.
Mr. Speaker, thank the Secretary of State for his update. Could I echo calls for support for business or keeping an eye on the impact of this crisis on business, but also for areas like mine in North Yorkshire, off-grid gas and oil customers do not have the same protection as many other energy customers, and could he and his team also focus or have regard for those customers as this crisis evolves?
I thank him for his point on business and particularly on the issue of heating oil, which is a really, really important point because people who are using heating oil are exposed to what is happening in the market. Now, obviously, it depends when they are restocking their heating oil, and as I've said a number of times, depends on how long the crisis goes on. But I think he's right to raise that point as a particular area that we need to look at.
Ben Gouldsborough.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And to follow on exactly from that question, I also represent a very rural constituency in South Norfolk, and there will be constituencies up and down the United Kingdom, and particularly Northern Ireland as well, where we are heavily reliant on heating oil as our source of energy. Can I ask the Secretary of State what action is going to be taken for the medium and short term to try and take into account the price shocks? Because already I've had the chair of the parish council in Thurleton in touch, and many constituents who are very, very worried about this price shock.
Well, obviously, we're in the first few days of this crisis, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think the best thing I can say to my honourable friend and indeed honourable members on all sides who are concerned about this issue, and totally understandably so, is we're very much aware of where the exposure comes, the fact that the price cap is a guarantee, and I chose my words carefully earlier by saying for the vast majority of people, the price cap of domestic consumers, it provides a guarantee, with those using heating oil in mind that they were not that they were more exposed. We will look at that issue, and indeed I go back to the wider point I made, which is both the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have shown a determination to act on the cost of living crisis, and obviously much of this depends on how long the crisis goes on, but the point is well taken.
Please, Savile Roberts.
I appreciate what the Minister's just said about heating oil, because in Dwymo Meirionydd, 55% of households are off the gas grid. Many rely on alternative heating fuels, and they aren't, of course, protected by the energy cap price. We also pay the highest standing charges of any region in the United Kingdom and are exposed to global market shocks in the sense that deliveries can be late and also the prices are passed straight on. In the energy crisis triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, off-grid households had to wait months longer for any support, but they did get a one-off alternative fuel payment of £200. Could he tell me whether he would consider something similar to the alternative fuel payment at this time?
I won't speculate on that, but what I will say to him is something important, which is one of the things that I've emphasised in all the calls I've had and the discussions within my department, and I think this is very, very important, is we must learn what was done right during the Russia-Ukraine crisis in terms of the previous government's response and where there were challenges and what lessons we must learn. And that's been one of the emphases I've placed on both my conversations with our civil servants, with other businesses and indeed international partners. And I've sort of heard what she said on this specific issue and will definitely bear it in mind.
Baran Moon.
Whereas, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's perfectly reasonable for opposition parties to espouse the policy of reopening oil and gas fields. It's just the wrong policy. And there is no clearer example that it's the wrong policy than a moment like this. The only way that we can generate energy independence is by accelerating our transition to renewable energy. And with that in mind, and I know that the Secretary of State is very much focused on onshore wind, offshore wind, solar. Would he think again about the department's policy towards geothermal energy? We've just had our first geothermal energy plant open in Cornwall. We've got vast deposits of geothermal energy. I think it could be a really useful addition to the mix of renewable energy.
Let me first of all celebrate the opening of the plant. Indeed, I sent a video celebrating the opening of the plant. I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but I congratulated my honourable friend on his brilliant advocacy. Look, I accept the point he makes, which is we've got to look at all of the technologies at our disposal. One of the reasons that I'm very glad that Lord Whitehead has joined our department is he's got a specific brief, as he will know, covering these alternative technologies. And absolutely, my view is if it can bring down bills, if it can help get to cleaner power, then we should go for it.
Sir Julian Lewis.
I fully accept the argument that energy independence will be enhanced both by renewable energy and in particular by nuclear energy. But everyone seems to accept that we will go on having some dependence on fossil fuels for a considerable period of time. Whilst it's discouraging to hear that no matter how much we extract from the North Sea, it won't lower prices, although that does sound rather a strange conclusion, but I'm willing to accept that it's true. The fact is that if we are going to need such supplies for a considerable period of time, they may be cut off from other sources. Therefore, security of supply is an important element of the mix. Isn't that obvious?
Do you say to him that's why we said in our manifesto we would keep existing oil and gas fields open for their lifetime? And indeed, we didn't just say it. We had a very good dialogue with the industry where they said one of the things that will make existing oil and gas fields competitive is if you have tiebacks to those fields with new production. And indeed, we listened and we accepted it. I think the point I would make, and I have great respect for the honourable gentleman, the point I would make to him is, I think the issue he's averting to is exploration licences, because the North Sea is a declining basin. Obviously, there are tax matters, they're a matter for the Chancellor. All of the evidence is that exploration licences, in terms of production, are entirely marginal, and the average time, as I said earlier on, from exploration to production is 10 years. But in the 10-year view, the most important thing we can do for our energy security, by far, multiple times by far, is drive towards the clean power, which I think he supports and which is the centrepiece of our government strategy.
Before I call the next question, can I just remind members to keep their questions and perhaps answers short? Ewan Steinbank.
I appreciate the Secretary of State's incredibly important update to the House, especially regarding energy security. There have been reports in the media of PetroChina being barred from all exports of diesel and gasoline by the Chinese government. With PetroChina's co-ownership of the Grangemouth import terminal and following their role in the closure of Scotland's only oil refinery last year, what assurances can the Secretary of State provide my constituents regarding security of imported supply coming through Grangemouth?
Good question.
We use negligible amounts of fuel from China, and I can absolutely reassure my honourable friend and indeed his constituents on security of supply.
Claire Young.
Deputy Speaker. On nuclear, I note that had SMRs gone to Albury, Willow would still be available for other options to reduce our fossil fuel dependence. But I want to ask about small businesses. On top of a rising tax burden, the fear of further energy spikes makes small businesses in my constituency, particularly energy-intensive ones like hospitality and manufacturing, fear for their survival. Will the Secretary of State introduce new measures to support them?
Well, the Honourable Lady raises a very important issue, and indeed my honourable friend who's briefly left the chamber has got a particular, who is partly a minister in DBT, has got a particular focus on how we can help small businesses in terms of getting them better deals, better regulation of the deals they get is one of the things. Ofgem is going to have a role in what was previously an under-regulated market. But then on the wider point, which is the impact of this crisis on them, I reiterate by way of reassurance, I think, to her what I've said to others in this House, which is Absolutely this government is very, very focused on the impact of this crisis on households and indeed businesses, and we won't hesitate to act.
Catherine Fuchs.
Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his statement and for this government's laser focus on renewable energy in England and Wales. So does he agree with me that this should deliver basically a triple whammy for us? We will not be at the mercy of foreign states for our energy, bills for consumers will go down, and finally we will reduce the impact of the biggest threat to our planet, which is climate change.
I think my honourable friend is so right, and I do say actually one thing that is very, very interesting is when I talk to partners across the world, including in Europe, as the Liberal Democrats asked about, and indeed elsewhere, so many countries now have this approach, which is the case for renewables was always a climate case, but it is now for so many an energy security case, as much as a climate case, because they're in similar place to us. They are price takers, not price makers.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State very much for his statement. As soon as the first missiles were launched over Iran, those within the energy sector were already warning that prices would escalate. The public can little afford the price gouging that took place when Russia invaded Ukraine. So what steps will the Secretary of State take to ensure that any rise is absolutely necessary and will not result in greater profits for certain people and companies? And what consideration will be given to any energy scheme to help working families meet the costs? Thanks so much.
Well, the honourable gentleman speaks with great eloquence on these issues on behalf of his constituents and others, and he's absolutely right that in a situation like this, everyone has responsibility. Government has responsibility, private companies have responsibility too, and I think he's right to make them aware of that. And then on the wider question on impacts on families, I think it is important that government is very vigilant about the steps we can take to help people.
Alex Serble.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think that one of the lessons first from the Russia-Ukraine war and now the war in the Middle East is that oil refineries and fossil fuel infrastructure are primary targets and that energy pricing are part of war strategy. Our race to renewables isn't just important here in the UK, but around the world, looking at, for instance, the Urals crude price has now nearly reached the price of other crude markets. And we need to ensure that others are not reliant on Russian oil being delivered by the shadow fleet. Is the Secretary of State working with other countries to ensure that they are taking the same path in terms of the renewable transformation as we are?
Friend speaks with great eloquence on these issues, Madam Deputy Speaker, and he is absolutely right. And in a sense, as I said earlier to my honourable friend, it's so striking that so many countries now talk about these issues as an energy security issue. For the 80-plus countries who supported a roadmap to the transition away from fossil fuels at COP30, it was as much about energy security, as much about their own situation, as much about bills and their fear about exposure as it was, obviously, about the long-term threat we face from the climate crisis, crucial as that is.
Lincoln Jock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement, which I read with very closely and then listened to very closely too. Would it be fair to summarise the Secretary of State's statement today that he is not going to change, actually do anything differently as a result of the conflict in Iran? Because I listened for it and read it very carefully in the statement. It didn't appear to me that we're going to change anything. It was more a series of things that we were doing already.
No, I don't think that's right at all. Look, I think the truth is about these crises is that it's incredibly important that government looks at everything it can do, in particular to help, as I've said a number of times in this statement, the impact on families and businesses. What I want to reassure him and the House of is that this government has the right strategy on energy policy. And if I may say to him, what I think the lesson we all need to learn is this exposure to fossil fuel markets is dangerous for the country, and the best thing we can do of all, is speed up as much as we can our drive to renewables and indeed to nuclear, and the more help he can give us supporting that, the better.
Clive Efford.
Deputy Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement, and all I can say is more power to his renewable elbow. Just because because it just seems to me that we go in my time here, we've gone through these crises. The price in oil and gas goes up. Our constituents pay higher bills. The businesses pay higher bills, and the Conservatives learn nothing and don't realise that the only way to really provide secure and cheaper energy is to have a secure supply here at home. But nonetheless, in the meantime, we are stuck with it. So can I just urge him to be open to assisting our constituents and businesses if they do see a severe spike in their energy bills?
To respond, I must conclude this in around 15 minutes. Questions must be shorter. Minister, answers just as sharp.
I'm glad to hear that my elbow is renewable, and I do agree with him that we must be willing to act on behalf of his constituents and others.
Amanda Hagg.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for his statement. Households, businesses and charities in North West Leicestershire have already highlighted some immediate pressures on the cost of heating oil and fuel costs in recent days. Does the Secretary of State agree that energy security across our country is vital and that cheap, clean power is key to delivering that security? But could he share what additional work he will be doing to secure energy costs for our families and businesses in North West Leicestershire and beyond?
Well, I do say to my honourable friend that she's right to raise the heating oil issue, and as I've said a number of times, I think it is an important thing, and it is very, very much on our radar. And on the wider point, she's absolutely right too.
Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's right when he says that because of our reliance on oil and gas, we are a price taker, not a price maker. We are exposed, and families in Burnley, Palliative and Briarfield are worried. Will he continue to strengthen our homegrown sovereign energy supplies and production to keep driving down energy bills? And will he perhaps, given potential future wholesale price volatility, look at getting suppliers in the room again to reduce standing charges, which people see as unfair, regressive and unrelated to their energy use?
On standing charges, somebody asked me about it earlier, and I neglected to respond. One important thing that we did was to transfer the warm homes discount from standing charges to unit rates, which helped make a difference on bearing down on standing charges. But I do reassure him, and indeed many of his constituents and others who are concerned about this issue, something I talk about with Martin Lewis and others, we continue to look at this issue.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I really do thank the Secretary of State for all that he is doing. But at times like this, we think about our most vulnerable constituents, and whilst the energy price cap will protect them for now, we worry about the longer term, not least moving into next winter. Can my honourable friends just say what he's doing around social prescriptions and also social tariffs to ensure that we really do protect those most vulnerable constituents?
Well, an important decision we took was not only to extend the warm home discount for this winter, but for 5 years ahead, to give assurance to 6 million people, including in her constituency, that they would have protection. I want to reassure her, though, we know, particularly, and she speaks so well for the most vulnerable in our society and in her constituency, we know the exposure people have, and we continue to look at all of the measures we can take to help people.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is precious little good news around at the moment, but I may actually have some for the Secretary of State. I've listened to the contributions from the benches opposite, and I think I've discovered a new renewable energy source. The amount of hot air coming from that side of the House could surely heat 100 homes. However,
get it drilled.
My question is whether the Secretary of State thinks that if we were to do what the Shadow Minister suggested and cut the energy level at a time when prices are spiking and profits are about to rise, whether his constituents in Doncaster North would welcome that, because mine in Lichfield, Burntwood and the villages would not appreciate letting companies off like that.
My honourable friend makes his point in a very eloquent and amusing way. I mean, the thing I would say to him is, I think this is why it's so important to recognise that gambling on low fossil fuel prices, it's crises like this that show that gambling on low fossil fuel prices is so dangerous, because the impacts that it can have because of geopolitical instability are so great on his constituents and those across the country.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Secretary of State's statement, although I do want to gently disagree with one point, because I think he made the point that he believes the opposition have failed to learn the lessons or somehow forgotten the lessons from Ukraine. I actually think it is worse. It is nothing more than short-term opportunism. They hoped that nothing like Ukraine would happen again, so forgetting the lessons that drove up bills and did significant damage to our economy. So does he agree that their short-term opportunism on energy security and national security is not in the long-term interest of our country?
And I think it's incumbent on all of us to tell people on the basis of the evidence what we should be doing as a country. And we've heard from so many parts of the House today a recognition that actually betting on fossil fuels, gambling on fossil fuels is incredibly dangerous.
The statement is a stark reminder that energy security is national security, is economic security. And for those who oppose clean, green British power are handing a gift to those people who wish to do us harm, will my right honourable friend ensure that it's only the British interest that determines energy policy?
Honourable friend puts it incredibly well. This is about clean, homegrown power that we control, not international markets, not those fluctuations, so we get off that roller coaster which does such damage to families across the country.
Mary Glindon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, but at a time when the UK is increasingly dependent and exposed to internationally traded LNG, doesn't delaying the OGPM risk reducing investment in domestic supply exactly when global markets are least stable?
Well, I agree with my honourable friend that driving to renewables, driving to clean homegrown power is crucial. I also would say, because I know she takes an interest in these things, the North Sea continues to play an important role in our energy mix and will do so for decades to come.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's interesting to note for the duration of this statement and question and answer session that there's been zero participation from the SNP and Reform. Goes to show exactly how much they care. Both parties care about Scotland's energy security. Now, I understand and I appreciate that the Secretary of State won't be able to give an in-depth response to the dispatch box today, but can he give any update on Project Willow at Grangemouth? Specifically, I want to know about future jobs that are coming to the town and any potential government ownership, securing our industrial security and Scotland's energy sovereignty.
Well, my honourable friend is a very important advocate for his constituents and indeed for Project Willow. He'll know that we've made a number of announcements around Grangemouth in recent months, but I can also assure him that we continue to drive forward on Project Willow. The Prime Minister set out 200 million that will be available from the National Wealth Fund. We continue to work with private industry because we're determined to create a future for Grangemouth and its communities.
Andrew Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And this will be a worrying time, not only for households, but for the energy-intensive businesses in my constituency. We already lost soda ash production from Northwich after 150 years last year, in part due to their high energy costs. I wonder if my right honourable friend could say what support he intends to provide businesses, both to get through this crisis and into the future, so we can make sure that they stay viable and competitive.
Well, the step forward we're taking, Madam Deputy Speaker, is to give more help to the energy intensives, both this April and indeed next April when we get to 7,000 businesses. But I want to acknowledge, as I did, I think, to one of the honourable members opposite, we know there is further to go on helping businesses. Energy UK and the CBI have now formed a joint partnership looking at these issues. We want to work with them. You know, there are always, one of the challenges here is around the costs of action, but we recognise the issue that my honourable friend raised.
Question, Samantha Niblett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today and the statement, which I'm very grateful for, really does drive home the importance of energy security and the move to renewable, but just as equally important is food security. And in my constituency of South Derbyshire, we have had a plethora of applications for BESS and solar farms because we have a close connection to two grids. It's not to say that we don't need that, but I wonder whether he would meet with me and the member for Rushcliffe and other members of the Labour Rural Research Group to discuss the benefits of a local area energy plan.
Well, my honourable friend speaks very well on these issues, and I'm sure the Minister for Energy will meet with them and talk to them about these issues. As she will know, that we operate under guidance from the last government around avoiding the best available land where at all possible, even on the most ambitious plans for solar. It would occupy a very small fraction of agricultural land. But also I'd make this point. We had the largest ever solar auction in AR7, 5 gigawatts actually, Really good. And it's I'll tell him how much. I'll tell him how much. I'll tell him how much. It's the cheapest, around £60 per megawatt hour, and it's far cheaper than building new gas. And that is the fundamental point of this statement, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will carry on our drive to clean, homegrown power, because that is the right thing for our national interest.
Thank you. That is the end of the statement on energy markets. I'll give the front benches to point of order, Marie Goldman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On a point of order, the Government is today bringing forward a statutory instrument which, according to national media reports, will make significant changes to support for asylum seekers. The Home Secretary has just delivered a speech to the press to announce the changes. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that you and Mr Speaker are a staunch defender of the right of MPs to hear such announcements first and to be able to scrutinise and debate changes like this statutory instrument. Indeed, our constituents who have elected us deserve nothing less. So please, can I ask for your guidance as to how this House can properly scrutinise this announcement and others that will surely come like it in the future?
I thank the member for giving notice of that point of order, and I can confirm that I have not been given notice of a further statement by the Government. It is a case that major policy announcements should be made to the House first, and this is something that Mr Speaker has frequently reiterated. There has been a written ministerial statement today, but I am sure the Treasury front benches will have heard the feedback about members having a chance to scrutinise. The table or general offices may be able to advise on opportunities for that in respect of the statutory instrument mentioned in that statement. I can see the front benches nodding affirmatively. I let the ministers shuffle over. Of Bill Darren Jones.
Ministerial Salaries Amendment Bill.
Second reading what day?
Monday the 9th of March.
Monday the 9th of March. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Supply and Appropriation Anticipation and Adjustments Number 2 Bill, second reading.
Now, Minister to move formally.
Formally.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that the bill be now read a third time. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Our front benches shuffling again. Mr Steinbank, if you're ready, we will continue. Oh, lovely. We now come to the backbench debate on the contributions of Commonwealth troops in the First World War. I call Jaz Aswal, who will speak for up to 15 minutes. Jaz Aswal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I grew up in Ilford as a youngster with my childhood friends, Harp, Sukkah. We're ordinary lads, bound together by a love for football, oblivious to the fact that our fathers, grandfathers and great-grandfathers, whilst unknown to us, could have similarly been bound together, but on the battlefields of Europe. How were we to know? It wasn't taught in schools, nor was it shown on the silver screen. Films I watched as a child. It was as if the heroism of the troops from what we now call the Commonwealth had simply been airbrushed out of history. But the reality is very different. When Britain entered the war, the First World War, in August 1914, it did not stand alone. From across the oceans, continents, from villages and cities thousands of miles away, the Commonwealth answered the clarion call. They came from Canada, from Australia, from New Zealand, from the Caribbean, from Africa, and from the Indian subcontinent, then known as British India. Different languages, different cultures, different faiths, yet they stood together under a shared purpose. They stood together because in that moment the Commonwealth stood as one. On Monday, as we mark Commonwealth Day, a moment not only of celebration, but of remembrance.
remembrance of the extraordinary contribution made by soldiers from across the Commonwealth, men and women whose courage and sacrifice helped shape the world we live in today. The First World War is often remembered through images of muddy trenches in France and Belgium. Yet the reality of war was far wider. The war stretched across continents, from fields of Flanders to the deserts of Mesopotamia, from the mountains of Gallipoli to the plains of East Africa. And across all these theatres of war, soldiers of the Commonwealth fought and fell side by side. Over 620 Canadians answered the call. More than 416,000 Australians enlisted. Around 136 New Zealanders served. From the Caribbean, thousands volunteered for the British West Indian Regiment, crossing oceans to fight a war not of their making. And from the undivided India, the contribution was immense. More than 1.3 million soldiers from the Indian subcontinent served in the First World War, in the trenches of Europe, the deserts of Africa, and the battlefields of Middle East. Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, standing shoulder to shoulder with the British Tommy. They travelled thousands of miles from home, leaving behind families and communities who would carry the weight of their absence for a lifetime, because many would never return. Most had never seen Europe before. Many had never known the freezing winters of the Western Front. Yet, when they arrived, they faced one of the most brutal forms of warfare the world had ever witnessed. At the onset of the Great War, King George V appealed directly to the proud martial tradition of the Punjabis, invoking a single powerful word: izzat, honour, duty, reputation. He declared, and I quote, "Officers, non-commissioned officers and men, I look to all my Indian soldiers to uphold the izzat of the British Raj against an aggressive and relentless enemy." It was a deliberate and unmistakable call to men whose identities were rooted in honour, whose regiments carried generations of service, whose sense of duty ran deep, and they answered. A few weeks later, as the situation on the Western Front became increasingly perilous, the Secretary of State for War, a certain Lord Kitchener, rose in Parliament to steady a nation anxious about defence in Europe. He told the House in the other place, on their way from India are certain divisions from the Indian Army composed of highly trained and very efficient troops, and a body of cavalry, including regiments of historic fame. His speech in the other place was received to rapturous applause. Those words carried urgency and hope, because reinforcements were coming across thousands of miles of ocean. Ships pressed westward, carrying men who had never seen Europe. In September 1914, Indian troops arrived in France. Within weeks, they would be in the trenches. Amongst them were men of the Lahore Division, recruited largely from the Punjab. They were amongst the first colonial forces to land in France to defend the crown. The Sikhs had well and truly arrived. Landed in Marseille, greeted like heroes, French women rushed forward with flowers and embraces, hailing them as the saviours of France. But admiration could not shield these fine men from what was one of the most desperate moments of war. Within weeks, they found themselves fighting on the fiercest battles of the conflict, the First Battle of Ypres. German forces launched massive assaults, determined to break through Allied lines. The fighting was relentless. Trenches were overrun. Artillery pounded the earth day and night. Machine gun fire swept across the fields, and those trenches stood soldiers who had travelled from the golden fields of Punjab, from Bengal, from villages across the Indian subcontinent. Amongst them was a Muslim soldier, Khudaid Khan, a machine gunner from the British Indian Army. And in October 1914, his unit came under overwhelming attack. German troops advanced in large numbers, intent on tearing through Allied lines. One by one, the soldiers around him fell. But Khan did not waver. Even as he was badly wounded, he stood relentless in the face of the enemy. His courage held the line, delaying the German advance and preventing a breakthrough that could have changed the course of that battle. For his extraordinary bravery, he became the first Indian soldier, a Muslim, to receive the Victoria Cross, the highest, most prestigious medal of all. His story reminds us of something profound. Heroism knows no nationality, courage has no borders. And across the Commonwealth, millions of soldiers stepped forward. They were farmers, students, labourers, clerks, teachers, ordinary people placed in extraordinary circumstances. And in the trenches, life was very harsh and unforgiving. Mud-filled trenches, shell fire shook the ground, cold winters, relentless rain turned battlefields into oceans of mud. Letters written home never reached. One soldier who wrote home of a cold that pierced through his uniform, of frost covering the ground, of the sheer strangeness of a fighting in a land so far from home, and yet they stood firm. Because in the trenches it didn't matter where you came from or the colour of your skin. What mattered was who you stood beside. A Sikh soldier sharing a trench with a Scottish Highlander, a Muslim cavalryman alongside an English infantryman, a Caribbean volunteer marching with an Australian battalion. Different faiths, different languages, different cultures, and yet united by a shared commitment, united by loyalty, united by courage. The story of the Commonwealth in both the world wars is not only the story of soldiers, it is the story of labourers, nurses, porters, and support workers, the men and women whose efforts, who made victory possible. Everywhere across the war, the Commonwealth was present, and everywhere the cost was immense. More than 1.1 million soldiers from across the British Empire and the Commonwealth lost their lives in the First World War, according to records maintained by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Of course.
Fine.
I thank the honourable member for my honourable friend for giving way and congratulate him on securing such an important debate. Can I join him in paying tribute to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, who do such important work conserving these sites across the country. I was lucky enough to have a tour of the Holy Ghost Cemetery in Basingstoke, and we also recently, and will you also join me in paying tribute to the volunteers that do the important work preserving these sites, ensuring that troops from across the Commonwealth, their service and sacrifice are honoured both today and into the future.
Thank you. Thank you for that intervention, and I absolutely agree with everything my honourable friend said. From undivided India alone, around 74,000 soldiers were killed, each a son, a brother, a husband, a friend, each one a life cut short by war. For many years, the full story of the Commonwealth contributions was not widely recognised. Remembrance often focused on Europe, but gradually the history is correcting that imbalance. Research by British Future found that in 2014, only 22% of people knew that Muslim soldiers fought for Britain in the First World War. By 2018, that figure has risen to 38%. But there's a lot of people out there who still are oblivious to that fact. Soldiers from the Christian faith remain the most widely recognised at 79%, whilst awareness of the Sikh contribution rose from 34% to 38%, with Jewish and Hindu soldiers also increasingly recognised. They also found that 75% of public agree that learning more about South Asian contribution to World War history could help social cohesion in Britain. So it's encouraging to see that this growing recognition of ethnic and faith diversity of the armies that served in Britain. One example is Hadith Malik, a Sikh, the first Indian Sikh to fly as a pilot in the Royal Flying Corps during the First World War. He had joined the Corps in 1917 after initially being rejected because of his colour of his skin. Yet he persevered, flying combat missions over France and Italy, even facing the famed Red Baron. He also went on to play first-class cricket for Sussex and Oxford University, where he studied. Hardeep Singh Malik lives in our memory today. And through the words spoken in this House or across Britain and throughout the Commonwealth, historians, museums and memorial organisations are working to ensure that the sacrifices of all those who served are remembered. No story left behind, no hero forgotten. Institutions such as the Imperial War Museum preserve letters, photographs and personal accounts from soldiers across the world. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission maintains cemeteries and memories across more than 150 countries. When we visit these cemeteries today, we see something absolutely remarkable. Row after row of headstones, some marked with a Christian cross, some with the Islamic crescent, some with Sikh khandas, some with the Hindu Om, and some with no religious symbol at all. Different names, different backgrounds, but equal in sacrifice, equal in remembrance. The story of the Commonwealth soldiers in the First World War is more than a chapter of history. It's part of the foundation of the modern Commonwealth, a testament that long before globalization became a common phrase, people from across the world were already connected through shared struggle and shared sacrifice. It reminds us that the diversity has always been part of our story, long before the community's contribution to our NHS, to our public services, contributions that today are so often the only measure used to justify our belonging to Great Britain. It reminds us that unity, true unity, does not erase our differences, it embraces them. Because the men who fought in those trenches together did not become the same. They remained proudly of who they were, but they stood together. And sometimes that is what matters most. As we mark Commonwealth Day, we reflect on the contributions of the diverse communities who came together to defeat tyranny. And we remember that they came from every corner of the Commonwealth, from distant villages, from bustling cities, and from different cultures and different faiths. And yet, when history called, they answered together, they fought together, and many of them fell together. More than a century later, their legacy still speaks to us. It reminds us that the strength of our societies always come from unity, from standing together in difficult times, from recognizing that our shared humanity is stronger than the differences that divide us. So today we honor them, not only for the battles they fought, not only for the sacrifices they made, but for the examples they left behind at a time when language, race, religion and skin color are too often used to divide us. The story of these soldiers reminds us something far greater, that it reminds us that people of different backgrounds can come together in the service of something bigger than themselves. That courage transcends culture, that honor transcends borders, and unity forged in sacrifice can endure. It is easy to forget the emission of this shared history of valor has rendered the nation's classrooms, museums, silver screens bereft of an inclusive, balanced heritage education. In multicultural Britain, this has led to a lack of awareness and ultimately the propagation of misinformation in popular culture to the detriment of British, Hindus, Muslims and Sikhs. An example of courage, of service, and above all, an example of unity. They came from every corner of the world, but in the trenches of the First World War, they stood as one. And because of them, we remember that the Commonwealth was never simply a collection of nations. It was and remains a community bound by shared history, shared sacrifice, and shared hope for the future. So let us remember that there is more that unites us than divides us. Thank you.
The question is as on the order paper, and I call Rebecca Smith. Backbenchers are on a 6-minute speaking limit. Rebecca Smith.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Ilford South for securing this debate. Their name liveth forevermore. The words carved onto each stone of remembrance in large Commonwealth War Grave Commission cemeteries and memorials right around the world. Today's debate ahead of Commonwealth Day on Monday the 9th of March speaks to that phrase, suggested by Rudyard Kipling, as we remember the legacy of those we commemorate. Now, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, once referred to as the Imperial War Graves Commission, but altered in 1960 for obvious reasons when the Commonwealth was formed, represents ultimately 6 countries whose troops came together from the Commonwealth to serve in the First World War and then again in the Second World War. But within those 6 countries, many others are already also represented, as has been alluded to in the first speech this afternoon. They're across 23,000 locations and 153 countries and territories. Now, for those who don't know, I've previously worked for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and whereas before I'd have an hour, I obviously have a bit less time this afternoon, but I hope to do the work some justice. It's important that we reflect, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are currently sites right across the world being impacted by ongoing conflict, but ultimately the Commission has a commitment to maintain and upkeep those sites in perpetuity. For those who don't know, there is a uniformity of commemoration that takes place with the Commission, where every single person who we are aware of having died in service in the First or Second World War receives either a headstone or a memorial. Now, these are different from village and town memorials. They are specific to the Commission, and they commemorate between the 4th of August 1914 and the 31st of August 1921, those who fell within those dates, and the 3rd of September 1939 and the 31st of December 1940. So for those of you who are visiting sites with the Commission, you might notice that some died after those ending of the war dates, but that's because they may well have died of illness after those dates. What I want to focus on, though, with the time remaining, is the contribution of Commonwealth troops across the South West. In South West Devon, my constituency, 137 are commemorated across 26 sites, and of those, 61 are from the First World War, and they represent at least 5 nations who they served with. Plymouth as a whole has over 25,000 commemorated, most significantly on the Naval Memorial on Plymouth Hoe, but also right across the city in local churchyards and villages. Now, there was a vast contribution of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and their role is to commemorate those troops, to tell their stories, and a big part of this is a project called Evermore. So 2 years ago, I would have struggled to have some of these stories, but as members of the public have made their contributions, we now have much more information about the men and women that we commemorate. So it's best to share some stories, and that's exactly what I'm going to do today. Now, Ernest John Quest was one such constituent of mine, were he still alive, who was born in Leamore and subsequently buried in the Methodist graveyard there. It's a tiny village up around the China Clay Works. It's pretty bleak, but that is where he was born and raised and where he was ultimately buried. Now, he joined the Australian munitions workers, having gone out to Australia as a British man in his early 20s, but then he came back towards the end of the war, serving in munitions to ensure that we had enough equipment to fight the war, and he only came in the beginning of 1918, but sadly by the end of the year had died of pneumonia. But because he was already here in the UK doing that work, he was able to be buried close to home with what would be called a private memorial. So he doesn't have a commission headstone, his family put their own headstone in place for him. But ultimately those munitions workers came because they were offered a freebie effectively. They came over here to work to provide that service, but are a key part of those that the commission commemorate, both here in the UK and abroad. Now, James Wilson, from an equally small part of my constituency, Yelverton on Dartmoor, and anybody who is watching this speech will know the Devon Tors Hotel, which is a key landmark on a big roundabout in Yelverton, and that was what his father ran as a boarding house. He too went to Australia, Madam Deputy Speaker, and was a single farmer in 1915 when he enlisted, and he served with the Australian Imperial Forces, and he came over here, served in France, but sadly died just after the war, again of influenza and pneumonia, and was buried in a tiny village of Meavy on Dartmoor. Now, he links very briefly to my favourite grave, not something I ever thought I would say, but when you work for the Commission, that becomes what you talk about, of a man called Charles Allen, who was also Australian. And he is unique because I believe he is the only grave that is in the UK with his photograph on it. Now, he was killed in 1917. He was a very handsome man, and his granite stone cross in Efford Cemetery has a little enamel plate with his photograph on, which when you're doing tours of that cemetery serves to show you just quite who these young men were that lost their lives. Now, again, he came to the UK to do his basic training as an Australian, but sadly died of illness before he'd even started. Furthermore, we have a South African Labour Corps buried in Wembury, probably the most picturesque location for a headstone overlooking the South Devon coast. And then finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to speak of one family, the Tuckers of Yumpton. 3 brothers, all killed between the 12th of March 1917 and the 10th of August 1918, commemorated in Tynecott and in 2 French cemeteries as well. One missing, we do not know where he is buried. His brothers have graves, but all are then commemorated by the family back home in Devon. A further Tucker, not related, born in South Africa, but also commemorated in my constituency in Plymouth, who died at the age of 33. He is buried in Plympton. Now, why is this important? We keep their stories alive. It's more pertinent now more than ever. And just to flag, we've got War Graves Week from the 16th to the 24th of May, so there's plenty of opportunity for members to show their appreciation for the work of the Commission.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I congratulate the Honourable Gentleman for Ilford South for getting this important debate. I think it's important that we recognise the contribution of the Commonwealth troops in the First and the Second World War. When we remember the World Wars, we rightly honour the bravery of British servicemen and women. But Britain did not fight these wars alone. Millions of men and women across the Commonwealth stood alongside British forces and played a decisive role in defending freedom in Europe and beyond. More than 1.3 million soldiers from the Indian subcontinent served in the First World War. They fought in some of the most brutal theatres of conflict, including the Western Front, Gallipoli, and the Middle East. It is important to remember that what was known then as British India included regions that today form India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Many of these soldiers who fought for Britain came from areas that are now part of Pakistan. Among those who served a vast number of Muslim soldiers. In fact, historians estimate that millions of Muslim soldiers and labourers fought for the Allied forces during the two World Wars. At least 2.5 million Muslims contributed during the First World War, and estimated to 5.5 million during the Second World War. Across both conflicts, nearly 1.5 million Muslims are believed to have been killed in action. These men travelled thousands of miles from their homes to fight in conflicts that were not of their making. And Muslim soldiers fought in the trenches of northern France and Belgium, endured the freezing conditions of European winters, and served across battlefields stretching from Europe to North Africa and the Middle East. Many fought alongside soldiers of other faiths, sharing food, hardship, and danger. There are records of Muslim, Christian, and Jewish soldiers learning each other's burial rites so that the fallen could be laid to rest with dignity on the battlefield. One lady who often people forget about, a woman called Nur-Nisa Inayat Khan, who was a British Muslim woman who was the first wireless operator sent into occupied France. She was betrayed, but then arrested and tortured for months, and then executed at the Dachau concentration camp. She was given a George Cross posthumously as well. And yet, despite such enormous sacrifices, the contribution of Muslim soldiers remained largely absent from our national memory. At a time when we're seeing increasing divisions in our society, and in particular the demonizing of Muslims in parts of our political discourse and media, and some very senior politicians who should be absolutely ashamed of themselves, too often Muslims in Britain are portrayed as outsiders or as somehow disconnected from the history of this country. But the truth is different. Muslims were in the trenches of the First World War. They were there in the forces that fought fascism during the Second World War. They served in the Merchant Navy, in Labour Corps, and across battlefields around the world. Many of them never returned home. Their sacrifices helped defend the freedoms and democratic values that we all benefit from today. In my constituents, Bolton South and Walkden, many families trace their heritage to the Indian subcontinent, including Pakistan. For many of them, the history of Commonwealth soldiers is not a distant history. It's part of their own family stories. For example, my paternal grandfather fought in the war, and my maternal uncle had a King's Commission when at the time most people from the Indian subcontinent had the Viceroy's Commission. And that's why we have a sense of belonging to this country, and these debates like these matter. They remind us that Britain has always been shaped by the contribution of people from many backgrounds, faiths and cultures. Yeah. So when we remember the First and Second World Wars, we must remember the full story of that shared sacrifice.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I will put on the record that the work of Nashar Inayat Khan is something that I do talk about to my daughter as well, Farah, so her legacy will not be forgotten. I call Shaukat Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to also congratulate the Honourable Member for Ilford South for stealing most of my speech. No, it's absolutely wonderful and very, very powerful. Madam Deputy Speaker, we live in very polarising times, as my previous speaker mentioned, where all the debates seem to be on the grounds of our lines, and on lines of our differences of what religion we are, what colour we are, what creed we are, where we come from. And these debates are sadly not just in the airwaves or in the news channels, they're also in this chamber. And it's all about what divides us and not what brings us together. That's why I would again like to, in all seriousness, thank the Honourable Member for Ilford South for bringing this debate to the chamber, because it gives us this opportunity. Because even people from my community or backgrounds or from the Empire are not aware of their own history. They're completely not aware of their own history, and therefore not giving us the knowledge to able to debate these matters coherently. The contributions made by the Commonwealth soldiers in the First World War has already been mentioned from, by many speakers already. There were men of every faith and no faith and every colour. And can we imagine living in Africa or British India at the time, where there was obviously no televisions and very few photographs, and they were sent abroad to a foreign land? Absolutely must have been frightening for them. May have seen it as an adventure, but as soon as they landed on this shore with these climates that they were not accustomed to, must have been a real shock to them. More than 1.3 million soldiers from British India did serve in the First World War, including over 400,000 Muslims, of which 53,000 of them gave their lives. In total, over 2.5 million Muslim soldiers and labourers from across the globe supported the Allied war effort. In fact, the work of the National Muslim War Memorial Trust reminds us that 1.3 million soldiers from British India did serve in the First World War, including over 400,000 Muslims, of which 53,000 of them gave their lives. In total, over 2.5 million Muslim soldiers and labourers from across the globe supported the Allied war effort. In fact, the work of the National Muslim War Memorial Trust reminds us that their sacrifice was immense, yet, as we have mentioned already, very unoften spoken about. Commonwealth soldiers of all faiths served in the trenches of even Europe, in the deserts of North Africa and East Africa, in Madagascar and in the Far East. And together they faced the unimaginable hardships. Together they endured gas attacks, machine gun fire and waterlogged trenches, hunger and fear. We remember that the war was not only won by Britain, but by the Commonwealth united in purpose. Yet it is very painful to acknowledge that the story told through our memorials have been incomplete. In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, animal sacrifices in the war effort were honoured with a national memorial in Hyde Park in 2004, and rightly so. But this was way before black and Asian soldiers who fought, bled and died for Britain were recognised. And it's only recently that we begin to receive this recognition, and this is a truth that we cannot shy away from. Why did this happen? And the story that has already been mentioned, the story of Khudad Khan, who was born in 1888 in Punjab, and he served with the 129th Baluchis and became the first Indian soldier to receive the Victorian Cross. and his bravery in 1914 in Belgium, when his regiment was completely outnumbered, and he knew he was the only one alive. He pretended to be dead and slid away in the darkness of the night. And then he came back again, and he changed, indeed, as the Honourable Member for Ilford South said, the destiny of that battle. And now his descendants live in Leeds. You know, this is not somebody else's history, this is our history. Considered to Walter Tull, one of the most celebrated black British soldiers of the First World War. He enlisted in 1914, endured shell shock, returned to fight at the Somme, and was commissioned as an officer in 1917. And despite regulations that should have barred him because of his race, he continued to fight. And he was mentioned in dispatches for gallantry and coolness in Italy in 1918. But sadly, 2 months later, he died because of the gas that he endured. He died in no man's land. Or we can think of Lionel Turpin, a 19-year-old from Guyana who travelled, as he called it, to the mother country to serve on the Western Front. He survived the Somme, but not the effects of the gas attack. And also we can think of the 60,000 black South Africans and 120,000 other Africans who served in the labour units. And think of the men of the British West Indies Regiment who sailed all the way from Jamaica in 1915 to train on the Sussex coast before being deployed to Egypt and beyond. These people were not footnotes in history. They should never be footnotes in history. They were the very part of the fabric of our armed forces. They should not be footnotes. They should be headlines. That's why when Lawrence Fox questioned the inclusion of a Sikh soldier in the fantastic First World War film 1917, it did not expose diversity gone too far, but history yet not understood deeply enough. Sikh soldiers made up over 20% of the British Indian Army during the war. And in my own city of Leicester, a statue was unveiled in 2022, now commemorating their service, long overdue recognition for extraordinary loyalty and courage. We recognise their bravery, we honour their sacrifice, and we commit to remembering them, because what does their service teach us today? That courage knows no nationality, no religion, and no race. If we allow polarisation to divide us along lines of colour or creed, we dishonour those who stood shoulder to shoulder in the mud of Flanders. And if we forget the global nature of their sacrifice, we shrink our own national story. So let us tell it fully, let us teach it honestly, and let us commemorate it properly, for least we forget. We dishonour not only what they endured, but the legacy that they passed to us, a nation strengthened, not diminished, by the diversity of those who defended it.
Brian Leishman.
Good afternoon, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over 1 million troops from Commonwealth nations died in the quote-unquote war to end wars. And my thanks go to my honourable friend from Ilford South for bringing this important debate today to honour their service and the service of their comrades who did survive the First World War. Now, anyone that has been in a secondary school history class knows that World War I was a result of hyper-nationalism growing across Europe, coupled with a passion for militarism. And armament is all too familiar once again today, with the perverse and frankly absurd theory that spending billions of pounds more on weaponry than on housing, health, education and funding vital public services will be the route to improving people's living standards. History also shows that after nationalism and militarism, imperialism is likely to follow. Back then, European nations were vying for resources, colonies and the expansion of trade routes in Africa and Asia. So, war was a certainty. History also teaches us that it's mainly nations' working class populations that are sent off to fight and die. In World War I, the working class, including from Commonwealth nations, were treated as nothing more than fodder, disposable, sacrificed for glorious imperial gain. And across 2 world wars, fanatical nationalism, extreme militarism and the pursuit of imperial supremacy accounted for over 75 million deaths. And the contributions members from nearly every corner of this chamber make regarding us massively increasing spending to rearm the country is frankly terrifying. Do people not see that we are heading towards more conflicts, more war, more destruction, more death. The path that we are on will only lead to more suffering for the working class of all nations. War is a relatively easy thing to talk about, especially for people like me that have never served or wore a uniform. The respect and gratitude I have for those that have and do is enormous. Tragically, I find it incredible that the post-war consensus of trying to avoid war at all costs seems to have been largely forgotten.
Martin Rhodes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would start by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Ilford South, on securing this important debate, and also for his speech so powerfully opening the debate today. Many Commonwealth troops made the ultimate sacrifice for us. In my constituency of Glasgow North, there are a number of Commonwealth war grave sites and memorials that commemorate a total of 1,100 individuals. The Western Necropolis in Glasgow North alone contains 500 service personnel from both World Wars who are laid to rest in Commonwealth war graves. Among them are Canadians, Australians, and even American volunteers who served in Commonwealth forces. These sites are an important reminder, not just of the sacrifice that Commonwealth soldiers made, but also the role that Glasgow played in the war effort, from shipbuilding on the Clyde to the hospitals caring for the wounded. However, we must also take time to recognise the contribution of those Commonwealth soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice and yet, often due to their nationality, did not receive the recognition they deserved. These forgotten or neglected soldiers were often from the then empire, originating from places such as modern-day Pakistan, India and Bangladesh. My honourable friend, the member for Ilford South, and also the member for Leicester South, made reference to Gurd Khan VC, who was the first Indian Muslim to receive the VC. But we must do more to ensure that others, like Khan, and the more than 4 million British Indian Army soldiers who served in the two world wars are adequately remembered. In my constituency, a charity called Colourful Heritage has been working hard to promote these contributions through an exhibition in Kelvin Grove Museum and educational resources for schools across Scotland, helping the public and young people to engage with this history. More recently, Colourful Heritage, with partners, has been granted planning permission to establish Scotland's first permanent memorial to the British Indian Army in the grounds of Kelvin Grove. The design was agreed upon after consultation with community and faith groups, as well as pupils across a number of schools in Scotland. It reflects the diversity of those who served: Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, and those of no religious faith. Thus far, they have raised over £100,000, with the aim of raising a total of £270,000 to complete the memorial. I'm sure that members across the House will wish them well in achieving this important goal. As we reflect today on the contribution of Commonwealth soldiers to the First World War, our understanding of this deepens over time, as new stories come to light and previously overlooked service is properly recognised. I will give way.
Thank the honourable member for giving way, and he's making a very powerful speech. Would he agree with me that this is where the role of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and particularly their public engagement coordinators, is so important to go out and tell those stories? Because actually we have graves right around the country of Indian and Muslim, Hindu, Sikh service personnel, but actually ensuring that communities understand that they are in our midst is very important, as is highlighting the Neuve Chapelle Memorial to the Indians on the Western Front as well.
Martin Rhodes.
Thank the honourable member for that intervention. I do very much recognise the important work of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and also their outreach work, their public engagement work, and also recognise the huge contribution of volunteers in service of actually promoting that work. How we commemorate and who we commemorate must reflect the full breadth of those who served and sacrificed. I hope that the first permanent memorial to the British Indian Army in the grounds of Kelvin Grove will be a testament to that. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must remember our shared past if we are to help build our shared future.
I come to the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for Ilford South for securing this very important debate. And I, like him, want to start by sharing the story of Khudadad Khan for his extraordinary courage holding off wave after wave of German infantry in 1914. He became the first soldier of Indian origin to receive the Victoria Cross. Yet what makes his story even more remarkable is the moment in which it occurred. In late 1914, the British Expeditionary Force had lost around 70% of its original strength. Germany's armies were pushing through the Channel ports. Had they broken through, the war could very well have been lost in its first month, and the mainland Europe would have likely fallen under the domination of Imperial Germany. But the line held, and the line held in part because 45,000 soldiers from India arrived on the Western Front just in time. They had travelled thousands of miles from the subcontinent. Many arrived still wearing cotton uniforms designed for the heat of the Indian frontier when they were suddenly thrown into the freezing mud of Flanders. They had never seen trench warfare before. They faced artillery barrages, barbed wire, machine guns, and the bitter and unfamiliar cold of a Belgian winter. Yet they stood firm, and that moment tells us something fundamental about the First World War, because the story of that war is not simply a British story, it is a Commonwealth story. Over 3 million soldiers and labourers from across the empire fought alongside Britain in the First World War. The war memorials in my own constituency of East Walton bear testament to a generation who fought not alone, but shoulder to shoulder with men and women from across the Commonwealth. And the numbers alone are staggering. More than 1.4 million came from India, nearly 630,000 from Canada, over 400,000 from Australia, almost 130,000 from New Zealand, and many thousands from the West Indies, Africa, Fiji and beyond. And over 500,000 Commonwealth soldiers lost their lives. This was not a marginal contribution, it was decisive, and it altered the course of the war. Because Britain entered the war in 1914 with a relatively small professional army, around 700,000 trained soldiers in total, including reservists and territorials, and set against the vast conscript armies of the Central Powers, particularly Germany and Austro-Hungary, this force was tiny. Without reinforcements from across the empire, Britain could not have sustained the war effort. And the wartime Prime Minister David Lloyd George put it clearly. He said, had they stayed at home, the issue of the war would have been very different, and the history of the war would have taken a different course. We often hear that the arrival of the United States in 1917 tipped the balance of the war, and there is truth in that claim, but there is also a powerful argument that without the Commonwealth contribution, the war might not have lasted long enough for the Americans to arrive at all. I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and I was just wondering whether she would also agree with me that there was a significant contribution made by the 140,000 Chinese Labour Corps, ironically enough, who came over from 1916 to also bolster, well, to actually do a lot of the work on the front that then freed up the soldiers to be doing the fighting.
My honourable member is entirely right, and it's something I'll come back to later, the forgotten stories of this war. So from the mud of Flanders to the deserts of the Middle East, from the jungles of East Africa to the mountains of the Balkans, Commonwealth soldiers were present in almost every theatre of the conflict. And the bravery and resilience, too often forgotten and overlooked, was one of the most notable features of the conflict. Canadian troops faced chlorine gas for the first time at the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915, holding the line. At Vimy Ridge in 1917, 4 Canadian divisions fought together as one for the first time, and in just 4 days they achieved what the French and British had spent years and over 100,000 lives bravely failing to do. And this courage was not confined to the trenches. In the skies above Europe, Canadian airmen distinguished themselves with equal daring. Fighter aces such as Billy Bishop, awarded the Victoria Cross, played a crucial role in securing Allied control of the air. Australian troops bravely fought for 8 months on the steep cliffs of Gallipoli before playing a decisive role in the final offensives of 1918. And New Zealand, with a population of barely 1 million people at that time, sent more than 120,000 soldiers overseas, and nearly 1 in 5 of them never returned. And here I want to turn to my own constituency of East Walton, and it has a profound historical connection to New Zealand, dating back to the First World War. During the conflict, Walton served as a major centre for treating injured soldiers from the New Zealand Expeditionary Force, particularly those wounded in the Gallipoli campaign. And the Mount Felix Mansion was converted into the first New Zealand hospital in the UK. 27,000 New Zealand soldiers were treated there. 21 New Zealand soldiers, unfortunately, are buried in St Mary's Churchyard in Walton. And we remember that in our roads. New Zealand Avenue runs through the middle of Walton, and Adelaide Avenue is there too. And since 1920, an annual Anzac Day service is held at St Mary's Church. The Mount Felix Tapestry features the soldiers at the hospital, and a kohai tree donated by the New Zealand government in 1970 stands at the former site of the hospital. So my brilliant constituents in Esher and Walton ensure that the sacrifice of those from New Zealand who served in the Great War is remembered. If I could come back to soldiers from the Caribbean that served in the British West Indies Regiment operating across Europe, Africa and the Middle East. Many of these were denied the chance by the British government to fight as equals. Instead, they were often assigned labour duties, digging trenches, unloading ships, carrying supplies. And despite that discrimination, they served with courage and dignity. And African soldiers and portents were indispensable to the campaigns across the continent, carrying ammunition and supplied through terrain that would have stopped any conventional army. They suffered catastrophic losses, but they were the logistical backbone of the campaign, and one of their story remains one of the least known chapters of the war. Women across the Commonwealth as well were also vital to the British war effort, serving as nurses, driving ambulances, working in munition factories and keeping farms and industries running. And in many schools, our students still learn about the Somme, about Passchendaele, about the Western Front, but hear very little about the role played by Indian, African, Caribbean, Australian, Canadian and Chinese forces. And as Baroness Worthy actually powerfully put it, she said, our boys weren't just Tommies, they were Tariffs and Tajinders too. So when we speak of those who were served in the First World War, we're speaking about people from every corner of what was then the British Empire, people who crossed oceans to fight for a country they had never seen, people who fought in climates and conditions utterly alien to them, people who believed that they were fighting for principles, freedom, justice, and the defence of small nations. And yet the response of the British government in the immediate aftermath often fell far short of the ideals which these men believed they had fought for. West Indian soldiers were excluded from the London Victory Parade. In India, promises of reform were made in return for wartime loyalty, were followed by the brutality of the Amritsar massacre. The First World War did not just reshape Europe, it reshaped the political map of the world. And the modern Commonwealth and the family of nations it represents today has its roots in the sacrifices made during that war, which brings us to the present. We must honour the shared history that binds us to the Commonwealth. So let us ensure that their contributions are fully recognised. Their services must be fully integrated into our national commemorations, their stories taught in schools, so that young people understand that the First World War was not fought by Britain alone. We must uphold the vital work of organisations such as the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and their volunteers, whose quiet dedication ensures that the name of the fallen, regardless of their nationality, faith or background, are remembered with dignity, and that we fought alongside a brave coalition of nations and peoples, of millions of individuals whose courage, labour and sacrifice made victory possible, who fought in the mud of Belgium, the deserts of Palestine, the mountains of Greece and the jungles of East Africa, and many of them, tragically, who never came home. They were asked to fight and sometimes to die for a country they had never seen. Let us, a century later, remember why they came and the bravery with which they fought, not as a footnote to history, but as an essential part of the story of how that tragic war was fought and won.
I call the Shadow Minister, Mark Francois.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the son of a man who fought in the Second World War, I'm privileged to be able to sum up on behalf of Her Majesty's loyal opposition in this debate about those who fell in the First, and in particularly the vital contribution that was made by Commonwealth troops during that epic conflict. It turned out to be a manpower-intensive conflict, in which the contribution of Commonwealth troops was invaluable. The National Army Museum at Chelsea estimates that over 3 million soldiers and labourers from across what was then the British Empire and today the Commonwealth served alongside the British Army in multiple theatres of operations during the First World War. We've heard a number of erudite and touching tributes from honourable members to that effect this afternoon. Perhaps I could just refer to a few of them. But before I do, there is one other important point I want to make. Where are reform? Where, when we debate the contribution of people from all nations, of all colours, of all cultures, made 100 years or more ago to defending the freedom of what was then the Empire and is now the Commonwealth, why is that bench yet again empty when we debate defence-related matters? If these plastic patriots who love to wrap themselves in the flag aspire to be a party of government, let them at least come to this House and behave like it. Turning to the speeches, may I commend the Honourable Member for Ilford South for securing this debate, and then, if I may say so, for introducing it so brilliantly. He spoke memorably about the extraordinary contribution of the Indian Army, Hindu, Muslim and Sikh, all joined together as one army fighting for freedom against tyranny. He said, honour transcends borders. He was right. He was followed by my honourable friend from South West Devon, who spoke very knowledgeably about the vital work of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, not least because she worked for it, and she highlighted their marvellous endeavours to commemorate the sacrifice that were made in defence of freedom. On behalf of my party this afternoon, I would like to commend the Commonwealth War Graves Commission for everything that they do. The member for Bolton South and Walkden also spoke powerfully about the contribution of the Indian Army, especially its Muslim regiments. The member for Leicester South followed her in a similar vein and spoke in particular about the Sikh regiments, who have a proud martial tradition in British service, not least in the First World War. The member for Albert and Grangemouth made a very socialist contribution, if I might say so. But he also paid tribute to those who served. The member for Glasgow North also paid a fulsome tribute to Commonwealth troops. And the Liberal Democrat spokesman, the member for Esher and Walton, reminded us that after the largely regular British Expeditionary Force was wiped out, holding the line in 1914, it was eventually citizens' armies, including from the Commonwealth, who replaced them to win the war. Madam Deputy Speaker, as there were multiple contributions from across the Empire and the Commonwealth during the First World War, it'd be invidious to attempt to highlight any one in particular as more important than the others. Perhaps a better way of doing it is for me to attempt to summarise very briefly, in the few minutes I have to cover a war that lasted 4 years, some of the particular national contributions to the wider war effort. So to begin with the Canadians. Following the outbreak of the war, Canada established the Canadian Expeditionary Force, the CEF, principally for service on the Western Front. The Canadians fought in many of the major battles in that theatre, including Second Ypres, the Somme, Vimy Ridge and Passchendaele. In so doing, they were also supported by troops from Newfoundland, although that did not formally become part of Canada until after the Second World War. But the Newfoundland Regiment also fought at Gallipoli and then on the Western Front, including in the so-called last 100 days, when the Allied armies, the British Army in particular, but also with Commonwealth support, broke the back of the German army in the field. This victory, fully utilising the principle of combined operations, including infantry, artillery, tanks and aircraft, working in concert, is one that should not be underestimated and is often highlighted by military historians as a significant feat of arms, completely contrary to what might be called the Blackadder version of the history of the First World War. I see the Minister is nodding in assent. Then the Australians, who also made a major contribution to the First World War, in which over 400,000 Australians served in what was known as the Australian Imperial Force, the AIF. Over half of them became casualties, either killed or wounded. Perhaps the most famous Australian contribution, combined with their comrades from New Zealand, was in the ill-fated campaign at Gallipoli in 1915, when the Australian and New Zealand troops, now forever known as the Anzacs, suffered very heavy casualties, attempting to overcome the extremely well dug-in Turkish defences on the peninsula. Nevertheless, it is also important to record that Anzac troops also served bravely in other theatres of war, not least in the Middle East and also on the Western Front. India, to whom many members have already referred this afternoon, made the largest contribution from the Commonwealth, particularly if we include those from what is now modern-day Bangladesh and Pakistan, who in total contributed, I think, over 1 million troops over the total course of the First World War. I should declare an interest here, Madam Deputy Speaker, as my great-grandfather-in-law, Colonel William Sanders, served as part of the Indian Army and at one time commanded a battery of artillery towed by elephants. Before transferring to the Royal Garrison Artillery on the Western Front, and if I may say so, winning a DSO at the Battle of St. Quentin, something about which the family are obviously very proud. But the Indian Army of today, and indeed its Bangladeshi and Pakistani counterparts, still maintain proud regimental histories that date back to their actions in the First World War. South African regiments also made an important contribution to the Allied war effort, including the 1st South African Brigade, who famously fought at Delville Wood, which the troops abbreviated to the Devil's Wood on the Somme, and given what they went through, that was probably appropriate. Although the South Africans did not just fight on the Western Front, but also against German troops on the African continent itself, including in both East and Southwest Africa. It's also important to record the contribution of some 60,000 black South Africans who served mainly in support and logistical roles rather than as frontline infantry, but who nevertheless made a very important contribution to the Allied war effort, as indeed was recognised by General Jan Smuts. Briefly, yes.
Just on that point around the South African regiments, does he agree with me that it's vital that the Commonwealth War Graves Commission continues its work to honour those labourers, which it has done with the opening of a memorial recently in Cape Town, one soon in Kenya and Sierra Leone, and a commitment to do whatever it takes to ensure that those African labourers that have not yet been commemorated are in the future?
My honourable friend is clearly a subject matter expert on this matter, but I entirely agree with her sentiment, both about the contribution of those South African labourers, but also about the vital work of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. But it's also important to commemorate the contribution of Caribbean troops to the Allied war effort, most of whom served in the West Indies Regiment, as we've heard, which saw combat in France, Italy, Africa and the Middle East. And as indeed particularly pointed out by the Honourable Member for East and Walton, I believe. Albeit from a different conflict, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can reveal to the House that the records of the ship's company of HMS Victory at Trafalgar record the presence of a seaman whose name was John Francois. He was on Victory, but I do not believe he was a direct relative, as he was recruited from the Caribbean. Nonetheless, I can assure the House that there was at least one Francois at Trafalgar who served on the British side. In summary, in the very limited time available this afternoon, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've only been able to refer in the briefest outline to the contribution of troops from across the British Empire and the Commonwealth to what was believed, at that time at least, to be the war to end all wars. Unfortunately, that proved not to be the case, and the world was involved in a second major conflagration barely 2 decades later. Let us passionately hope that in our lifetimes, and indeed those of our children and grandchildren, we never see a third. but I would say humbly to the honourable member for Alloa and Grangemouth, as the Roman military theorist Vegetus taught us, civis pacem parabellum. He who desires peace should prepare for war in order to deter it. In thinking how to conclude, I came upon some lines from Rupert Brooke in his eternal poem, The Soldier. He wrote, "If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England." Well, if that be so, and I believe it to be so, then there's also a part of a neighbouring field which is forever Canadian, Australian, New Zealander, South African, Indian, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, African, and Caribbean too. Without the contribution of all those nations, from right across what was then the Empire and is now the Commonwealth, we would never have defeated the militarism of the Kaiser's Germany, and Europe undoubtedly would never have been free. We thank them all and their nations for their service, lest we forget.
Well, follow that, Minister Elkins.
Well, Deputy Madam Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Ilford South, for securing what is a very, very important debate at a very important time, and to all the honourable and right honourable members for their thoughtful contributions, and importantly, the spirit of the House in taking this debate forward. The role played by Commonwealth forces in the First World War is pivotal. Indeed, it's legendary, an all too often overlooked chapter of our nation's history. And I'm grateful to my honourable friend that this debate will help us tell that story to this generation. It is a contribution etched in stone in the heart of London, on the memorial gates on Constitution Hill, inscribed in memory of the 5 million volunteers from the Indian subcontinent, Africa and the Caribbean who fought with Britain in 2 world wars. It's a fitting memorial that honours around 3 million people from the Commonwealth who volunteered and fought in World War I, from the Indian subcontinent, from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, from Africa and as far as the Caribbean. I will.
You mentioned commemorating those who in London as well, and I've had the pleasure of, in my part of South East London, in Beckenham and Penge, going to see, going with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission to look at graves that they maintain. Does he agree with me they play a vital role, not only in maintaining and commemorating those who have fallen, but also educating children and young people today about the contributions they made?
I completely agree with the honourable friend. They maintain and look after thousands of memorials all over the world, which helps us continue to communicate and educate this important lesson. It's a memorial in London that commemorates the campaigns they fought, campaigns on the Western Front, in Gallipoli, Russia, the Middle East and Africa, indeed every major theatre of the conflict. And it's a memorial that rightly immortalises Commonwealth recipients of the Victoria Crosses during the Great War, including brave men like Kudada Khan, mentioned earlier, a courageous soldier in the British Indian Army who single-handedly held back the enemy to enable reinforcements to arrive, the first non-British recipient of our highest military honour during the First World War. Of the 1 million people under British command killed during the First World War, nearly a quarter came from the Commonwealth nations. Having served in multiple theatres of conflict to protect the country that I'm really proud to call home, and having lost good colleagues and friends, I have some ideas of the sacrifice they loyally made, but not in any way, shape or form at the scale. Over 74,000 people came from India, 65,000 from Canada, more than 62,000 from Australia, 18,000 from New Zealand and nearly 12,000 from South Africa. Their names are recorded by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission across the cemeteries and memorials on every continent. with dedicated memorials inaugurated or under construction in Cape Town, in Nairobi and Freetown in Sierra Leone. Commonwealth forces are honoured prominently during remembrance, with Commonwealth High Commissioners playing a high-profile role in commemorations at the cenotaph, but we must do more. Indeed, today we remember their service and their sacrifice, and I'm delighted their legacy lives on in our armed forces. Turning to some of the comments made in the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable friend from Ilford South made some really poignant remarks. Different languages, different cultures and different faiths came together to fight for a common good, demonstrating incredible honour, unbelievable duty and outstanding courage. And I think the key lesson from that was it doesn't matter where you come from, your religion, your race, they were united in a common cause. The honourable member from South West Devon was right to point out the outstanding work that the Commonwealth War Graves Commission does, and I commend her for her support to it in the past and ongoing. It commemorates 1.7 million casualties across the globe, and even right now we have 5,000 Commonwealth personnel serving in the British military. Our honourable friend from Bolton, South Walton, the story about a wireless operator deployed behind enemy lines, covertly inserted into France, is truly remarkable. It's describing how Commonwealth forces or forces from individuals from further afield did every part of the operational tapestry, both in the First and Second World War. And the honourable friend from Leicester South highlighted how our histories are entwined, but in some cases we fail to educate and communicate that in particular to the youth of the nation, and highlights the requirement, if we're to push in the same direction, we must understand our shared history and that common cause, which is one of democracy, the rule of law, the right to self-determination and equal rights. The honourable friend from Alloa and Grangemouth highlighted some interesting comments, and he mentioned war is easy to talk about. Well, I'll tell you now that war, if you've been engaged in it, is not easy to talk about. And I would say that the best way to avoid conflict is to deter it. And I support the honourable member from Raleigh and Wickford's comments that you don't deter it by not preparing for it. I tried to keep politics out of this debate, but this isn't about the lack of realism, this is about remembrance. The honourable friend from Glasgow North again mentioned education, communication to bind us together, to build bridges and remove the division that people are sowing within the country, to deal in unity, to deal in hope and ambition, to drive the country forward, and I completely commend that narrative. The honourable member from Esher Walton pointed to the staggering contributions from across the Commonwealth that I think we've heard from so many people, and such a poignant thing to dwell on. And then finally, the honourable member from Raleigh and Wickford highlighted the lack of individuals from certain parties in this House today. Well, I'll tell you where they are. They're probably out on social media, painting the sky grey, and then selling the country umbrellas. And I think it is an absolute travesty that they're not here today to hear about the joint history that every member has mentioned, talks about the shared sacrifice, and talks about what unity can indeed overcome. I also commend the points made about the early stages of combined arms manoeuvre, something that we're seeing in Ukraine with the use of uncrewed systems, which is changing how we fight. And unfortunately, conflict tends to be the mother of invention. I think my final point would be that when individuals from the Commonwealth came to fight from other countries, it was a huge unifying factor because bombs, bullets and battlefields don't discriminate. They served together, they died together, and now we must focus on how we tell the story to ensure that we live together. I'd like to close by again expressing my gratitude to my honourable friend for securing this debate. I'm pleased we've had the chance to mark the loyalty, the courage and indeed the sacrifice of Commonwealth soldiers during the First World War. More than a century later, their legacy still inspires many young men and women. We must do more to honour their sacrifice and indeed increase our ability to collectively recruit people into the British Armed Forces from all walks of life. Indeed, as our debate has shown, their legacy continues to inspire us all. Thank you.
Jazz Atwell to wind up.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank all my colleagues, friends honourable friends, right honourable friends who have contributed to this debate. It's really appreciated, and certainly as I close the debate, I'd just like to make a declaration that my paternal great-grandfather served in the First World War. My maternal grandfather served in the Second World War. And I just want to quote the words of General Sir Ian Hamilton, because I often remember this quote, and it reminds me, and I never met my great-grandfather. He'd passed away before I was born. But if I wanted to remember him, I wanted to remember him like this. So writing to the Commander-in-Chief shortly afterwards, General Sir Ian Hamilton paid noble tribute to the heroism of all ranks of the Firozpur Sikhs. In the highest sense of the word, extreme gallantry has been shown by this fine battalion. In spite of these tremendous losses, there was not a sign of wavering all day. Not an inch of ground gained was given up, and not a single straggler came back. The ends of the enemy's trenches leading into the ravine were found to be blocked by the bodies of Sikhs and of the enemy who died fighting at close quarters, and the glacier slopes is thickly dotted with the bodies of these fine soldiers, all lying on their faces as they fell in their steady advance on the enemy going forward. Thank you.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. I will allow a couple of moments for the front benches to swap over. To the backbench debate on the future of palliative care, I call Rachel Maskell, who will speak for about 15 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move the motion in my name on the order paper. I am grateful to you and the Backbench Business Committee for granting today's debate on the future of palliative care. While applied for last summer, it could not be more timely as government considers the modern service framework. Dame Cicely Sanders said, "How people dies remains in the memory of those who live on." Through what she called palliating total pain, the physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual and social pain, that palliative medicine can transform the way we not only approach death, but embrace life. Her legacy has driven palliative medicine since, with dedicated teams to deliver care, as was described to me in York, as not knowing that such outstanding care was even possible. Every complexity embraced and addressed. In 2024, 320,000 people died in England. 2 weeks ago, evidence published by Marie Curie showed 1 in 3 people failed to get the interventions they need. Over 100,000 people, despite requiring specialist palliative care, receive none. Demand is rising and will grow by 42% in a decade. Where you die, what day or what time determines the care you receive. 42% of all deaths occur in hospital, 28% at home, 21% in care homes, 5% in hospices and 4% in other settings like prisons. According to Sue Ryder, just 50% die at a place of their choosing. I've had the sheer privilege of working with leading academics and clinicians, health leaders, international experts, charities and people with lived experience in establishing the Independent Commission on Palliative and End-of-Life Care with Baroness Finlay, chaired by Professor Sir Mike Richards. We sought solutions to establish equitable access to high-quality palliative and specialist palliative care, and I am beyond grateful. I've been inspired and I have learnt much. I'm also indebted to Professor Fliss Murtagh from the Wolfson Palliative Care Research Centre at the University of Hull, and want to pass particular mention to Professors Catherine Sleeman, Irene Higginson of King's College London, Oxford consultant Professor B. Wee, Hospice UK, Marie Curie, Sue Ryder, the Association of Palliative Medicine, Together for Shorter Lives, and my own local hospice, St Leonard's, and so many more. We held 10 evidence sessions and 8 roundtables. We received 506 written submissions from experts and spoke to 129 witnesses, then presenting our report to the Minister. Now government has progressed to the modern service framework. It must be commissioned in a single pathway across all settings, focused on excellence and crisis prevention, and investing in the community. We found early identification to access high-quality specialist interventions transformative for patients. At the point of terminal diagnosis or increasing frailty, a serious illness conversation, as Professor Sir Chris Whitty recommended, undertaken by well-trained clinicians, inject an honest understanding to ensure the best patient-centred care while capturing the patient's wider social needs, priorities and goals. It facilitates good clinical planning, co-produced and personal. Optimal care is supported with palliative medicine. In York, the Frailty Hub brings all sectors together, clinicians and services. When intersected with palliative care, crisis and admissions are avoided. Emergency services do not escalate without cause, and rather medicine integrates with the hospice at home team, one set of records and one plan. Avoiding crisis management avoids distress. In the last 3 months of life, however, almost half visited their emergency department, and 1 in 8 spent more than 30 days in hospital. Placing palliative care professionals in emergency departments furthers the model to triage patients to the right service. Clinicians at the back door discharge into the community palliative care teams. On the wards, in hospitals, specialists connect with patients, introduce palliative care where appropriate, and seek to discharge the community to hospice or a specialist unit in the hospital, reducing hospital deaths and improving disease management. As our bodies fail, high-stakes interventions add little to the quality or quantity of life, yet carry risk, as do hospital stays with infection, deconditioning and disorientation. Far from this being the Liverpool care pathway, palliative care focuses on enhancing life and not hastening death. GPs have a significant role too, and I would just ask the Minister to review the retiring of the palliative care register. This focuses GPs on identifying patients for palliation early so interventions can be considered. So can she set out how she will still achieve these aims? People are identified far too late for palliative support, just 56 days prior to death for cancer and 27 days for non-malignant disease like respiratory, neurological, renal or cardiac disease, with conditions like dementia rarely ever referred. While there has been a move away from prognostication on life expectancy due to its unreliability and often significant inaccuracy, recognition of palliative needs early is key. Marie Curie's 2024 Better End of Life report identified that 40% of families had no conversation about deterioration or possible death. 20% were alerted in the last 3 months of life and 15% in the last week. Their report measuring unmet need for palliative care highlighted how 1 in 3 people don't receive specialist care. Their post-bereavement survey in 2024 showed a doubling of unmet need compared to 2015, when the ONS Voices survey, which should be reintroduced as again a post-bereavement survey, there they highlighted higher demand and poorer access. Further, we know that those from low socioeconomic and ethnic minoritized communities are significantly disadvantaged with late identification and poor palliative care access. Without agency and advocacy, outcomes are worse. Likewise, with physical and intellectual disabilities, such injustices demand change. Variation exists across ICBs too. Hospice UK's FOI showed spend ranged from just 23p per person to £10.33. The National Audit Office shows the inequity too, with 1 hospice per 2,900 patients to 1 per 54,300, yet provision is mandated by the Health and Care Act 2022. At night and over weekends, 75% of our time, the availability of advice and interventions available to relieve distress, difficulties and discomfort is also inconsistent when 24/7 services are needed. By day, a single point of contact essential, as the Association of Palliative Medicine has really impressed upon me. Specialist palliative care from highly trained professionals must be commissioned to manage complex pain and symptoms through effective drug titration and interventions like palliative radiotherapy, nerve blocks and neuromodulation, often never available. The Commission advised for a rapid escalation of complex cases to specialists to improve outcomes across all settings. Psychological support is pivotal, yet only 19% of hospices can access clinical psychology. Early assessments can palliate depression and anxiety and their consequences. And with young people with life-limiting and life-threatening illnesses, they must also have equal access to care. Paediatric palliative care differs from adults, but it is as ambitious in driving excellence. Tailored, age-appropriate care is needed, and expert parents need recognition for their advocacy too. I particularly note the concerns over transition into adult services. Special attention is needed to get this right. Turning to training, family carers provide £28.7 billion worth of care annually. They need training and support to be listened to, and above all, space to love, be and spend time. In addition to training and accreditation of the whole palliative health and social care workforce, in domiciliary and residential settings, hospices and hospitals, we need a workforce plan for the whole pathway. All undergraduate programmes must have palliative care content too. Specialist training to support GPs aspiring to consultant status needs dual accreditation in place. And the Commission heard how overseas trained staff need specific orientation to palliative medicine as each jurisdiction approaches death differently. Across the whole service, we need high standards and united objectives. In 2024, the cost of someone dying in England was £24,222, totalling £12.8 billion. 78% of this was spent in hospital settings, contrasted with just £1,017 spent on specialist palliative provision and £862 on community nursing. Research published today shows specialist palliative care delivered at home can save the NHS £7,908 per patient, while in hospital £6,480. This would save around 1.5 million bed days, or £817 million. Funding for hospice provision can no longer depend on bake sales and parachute jumps for essential healthcare. 2 in 5 hospices are currently making cuts, and 308 beds have been lost in a year, according to Hospice UK. Staff reductions and redundancies have occurred. Paediatric palliative care faces a £310 million shortfall. There has been an over-reliance on charitable funding, which is inherently inequitable.
Of course.
I thank the honourable member for giving way when she was making such a powerful speech. I would just like to draw attention to the hospice in my constituency of Esher Walton, Princess Alice Hospice, that received 20% of its funding from government, and then the rest of it through selling morning jumpers. Most constituents aren't aware of this, but they say they can only provide for a quarter of the provision that is needed in Esher and Walton because of the state of their funding. So would the honourable member agree with me that that situation needs to change, not least if we are going to make this equitable for everybody in our society?
The Honourable Member makes such a powerful case because this is talking about essential medicine, and we wouldn't do this to any other field of medicine, yet we are dependent on charities who do phenomenal work to fund essential healthcare, so of course we need to ensure that we properly fund that, and I'm going to come on to a few suggestions around that. While I recognise the dedication of my own hospice, St Leonard's Hospice, and the whole community around that in York, both generous and caring, it receives less than 24% NHS funding, this year getting just a 2% uplift from the ICB. My issue is this. So to invest in equipping and staffing in the community, building capacity to meet need, funding will be needed. Already there is a significant shortfall. Without this, then transition will slow and the model fail. The sector agrees. The ICBs have no transition funding, and without a health transformation fund, how will the Minister be able to deliver proper care for everyone? Second, if patients are moving into domiciliary or hospice settings, then funding should follow. Clinical staff, pharma, capital costs, utilities and other essential costs should therefore be covered by the NHS, since patients are now transferred from secondary care into the community. The modern service framework is due for publication in a matter of months, with implementation in April 2027. It requires a strong framework of accountability and governance. It would be helpful for the Minister to set out how the MSF will be evaluated and outcomes measured. And finally, bereavement. Of course I will, yeah.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way and congratulate her on the work that she's done in this. In talking about funding, I have two hospices that serve my constituency, Lindsay Lodge in Scunthorpe and St Andrews in Grimsby, and the funding percentage that they get through the NHS as opposed to charity varies dramatically. Would she agree that at the very least we need to regularise the proportion of funding that they get through the government?
The Honourable Member is absolutely right. We know how much palliative care and specialist palliative care costs, and that needs to be built into the commissioning process at a population level so that we see the equity brought, and many constituents, and I'm sure in his own constituency, will see certain demographics of his community excluded from being able to access that specialist care. So we need to drive the model, and if we don't have the funding there, don't have the resources, don't have the staffing, it will be very difficult to deliver the comprehensive service which everybody deserves at the end of life, should their care need palliating.
Would the Honourable Lady give way?
Of course.
I'm extremely grateful to the Honourable Lady, and I think we would all share in congratulating her on her immense work in this topic. I certainly do. I'm sure she sympathised with a constituent of mine who was brought to my attention by Marie Curie, where the lack of a doctor being on duty over a weekend meant that proper palliating medicine wasn't able to be prescribed, and distressing death came as a result. Would she agree with me that as well as the funding, we need consistency of care to be available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day?
I'm really grateful to the Honourable Member making the point he has about 24/7 provision, particularly in the evenings and weekends. And it is so inequitable across the country. And when you look into the research, you see such a small proportion of availability of those services. We need to ensure that we have an expert, a specialist available at the end of the phone to support clinicians, but also family members and patients themselves. But also we need to make sure we've got the workforce who can come out then and deliver, for instance, changing the medication that somebody's on or escalating their care. So it's absolutely crucial that this isn't a 9 to 5 service, but a 24/7 service. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to mention bereavement. Bereavement support varies, often unfunded, if at all. Grief costs the economy £23 billion a year, but individuals far more. It can be complex and have profound impact, especially with children. Commissioning appropriate bereavement support is vital, including counselling and for some social prescribing. In conclusion, palliative care affirms life and regards death as a normal process. It neither hastens nor postpones death, but to date it has been so inequitable. This debate must be a catalyst to provide outstanding care. Our ambition must go beyond the modern service framework. Our duty is to secure excellence in life until the final breath is taken.
The question is, as on the order paper, I think if members were to confine themselves to 5 or 6 minutes, we will get everybody in, but I don't intend to put a formal time limit on yet. Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I begin by congratulating most warmly the Honourable Lady for York Central on her exemplary record in campaigning for better palliative care. I will address just one segment of her panoramic presentation, namely the work done by the charity that she briefly mentioned, Together for Short Lives. They provided me with a very detailed briefing, and I apologise in advance if I make some points that others who may have had the same briefing are anticipating making. Children's palliative care enables babies, children and young people with life-limiting conditions, life-shortening conditions, or with severe medical complexity to live as well as possible until they die. Palliative care for children and young people is defined by the charity as an active and total approach to care from the point of diagnosis through the child's life, death, and beyond. By embracing physical, emotional, social, and spiritual elements, children's palliative care helps to achieve the best possible quality of life and care for every child with a life-limiting or life-threatening condition and their family. Giving families an opportunity to set out what they need and want is key to this approach. Children's palliative care is holistic and is provided by a network of services in hospitals, homes and children's hospices by the NHS and the voluntary sector, including children's hospices. These services should be planned, funded and provided in a way which enables children and families to access them when and where they need them. Now, the key problem is the one I'm about to set out. In England, integrated care boards have a legal duty to commission palliative care for children, young people and adults that it considers necessary. Across England and the wider UK, there is huge variation in the extent to which palliative and end-of-life care for seriously ill children and young people is being formally planned, funded and provided in ways that meet national and regional standards. Of particular concern is children and families' access to end-of-life care at home, and we heard this from the Liberal Democrat honourable member who intervened, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, provided by nurses and supported by advice from consultant paediatricians who have completed subspeciality training in paediatric palliative medicine, also known as GRID training. Despite some improvements, Freedom of Information requests published in March last year revealed that less than a fifth of integrated care boards currently commission these services on a formal basis. Meanwhile, over a third are still failing to meet this established national standard, and as a result, many families feel abandoned by a complex system which should support them to provide care once their child is diagnosed. Now, I have been asked by the charity to raise a number of questions, a rather large number of them, that I'm going to cut down, if I manage to squeeze them into, just 6. But the charity does stress the fact that the government's decision to allocate up to £80 million in ring-fenced NHS funding for children's hospices in England over the next 3 years is very welcome, but many challenges do remain. These are the 6 questions that I have picked out of more than a dozen and a half that I was presented with. First, will the Minister confirm that the modern service framework, which we heard from the Honourable Lady for York Central about, that the modern service framework for palliative and end-of-life care will explicitly acknowledge the difference between adult and children's palliative care and ensure seriously ill children's needs are not overlooked. Second, can the Minister confirm that the framework will also take a holistic approach and address the wide-ranging needs of seriously ill children and their families, including medical, emotional, social, psychological and practical needs? Third, will the Minister commit to using the upcoming 10-year workforce plan to examine how the existing children's palliative care workforce can be used as equitably as possible, organising services into NHS-commissioned children's palliative care operational delivery networks, such as I gather are currently used in neonatal care services, in order to help achieve this? Fourth, can the Minister commit to increasing investment in specialist paediatric palliative medicine training by £2.4 million annually to address the funding gap identified by the charity Together for Short Lives? Fifth, does the government support the Royal College of Nursing's call for nurse-to-patient ratios in all health and care settings, and will it commit to tackling the shortage in NHS community children's nurses? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, with ICB funding for children's hospices varying significantly across England, how is the Minister making sure that every seriously ill child and their family, regardless of where they live, has equitable access to palliative care?
Mary Kelly-Foy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Palliative and end-of-life care is one of the clearest tests of a health and care system. It's about whether people can live their final months, weeks or days with dignity, comfort and choice, and whether families are supported rather than left to cope alone. It should never be a lottery. Yet too often, people still experience palliative care as something that arrives too late, in crisis, and only after families have reached breaking point. Referrals are delayed, honest conversations are postponed, advanced care plans are created at the point when somebody is already too unwell to meaningfully shape them. Families describe repeating the same story to multiple professionals, not knowing who to call at 10 p.m. on a Sunday evening and watching distress escalate because there's no rapid response available. That's not what a compassionate system should look like. And I want to make 3 substantive points. First, we must confront the reality of variation and fragmentation. Access to specialist palliative care, hospice at home services and community nursing support still varies widely between integrated care boards. In some areas, there's a reliable 24/7 advice line and rapid response within hours. In others, support is limited, particularly out of hours, and families are told to ring 111 or attend A&E. And funding arrangements contribute to this variation. Adult hospices, which provide extraordinary care, still rely heavily on charitable fundraising alongside NHS funding, and that balance differs significantly between areas. It creates instability and inequity. Hospices such as St Cuthbert's Hospice in Durham do remarkable work supporting patients and families across our community, but like many hospices, they remain heavily dependent on charitable fundraising. And St Cuthbert's has recently had to make difficult decisions, including redundancies and the reduction of dementia services as funding pressures grow. And at the same time, much of the government support announced has been directed towards buildings and capital investment, while hospices and organisations like Hospice UK have repeatedly warned that the real pressure is on staffing and day-to-day service delivery. If we're to be serious about reducing health inequalities, we cannot accept such stark differences in something as fundamental as end-of-life care. And secondly, palliative care is not simply about the last days of life. It's about quality of life from the point of diagnosis of a life-limiting condition. Early specialist input can provide symptom control, reduce unplanned hospital admissions, and help people make informed choices about where and how they wish to be cared for. And that's why I welcome the emphasis in the NHS 10-year plan on shifting care away from hospitals and into the community, because for many people facing serious illness, the most compassionate and effective care is delivered at home or close to home, supported by community teams. And thirdly, there are practical steps government can and should take. We need a clear, fully articulated national strategy for palliative and end-of-life care with measurable standards and transparent reporting. Every area should be required to demonstrate that it provides equitable access to specialist advice, rapid response and coordinated care planning, so that the ambitions set out in the 10-year plan to strengthen community-based care are genuinely realised for people at the end of life as well. And we should move towards a model in which every part of the country has guaranteed 24/7 access to specialist palliative care advice, backed by community capacity to respond quickly when symptoms escalate. And workforce is central. Generalist staff in primary care, acute hospitals, community services and social care must feel confident recognising when someone is deteriorating, managing pain and other distressing symptoms, and initiating compassionate conversations. That requires investment and training and protected time, not simply guidance on paper. And we also must recognise that hospice and social care services rely on contributions of migrant workers, and recent changes to visa rules and the rights to remain is making recruitment and retention even more difficult at a time when these services are already under immense pressure. And we mustn't forget, as the Honourable Gentleman said opposite, that the strain on hospice care for children. Provision in this area remains uneven and the stakes are extraordinarily high. Recent campaigning around Hughes Law has also highlighted the importance of ensuring families caring for seriously ill children are properly supported and not left navigating complicated systems while dealing with unimaginable circumstances. And Madam Deputy Speaker, debates around assisted dying are now taking place in this Parliament, and I'm clear in my opposition to that proposal. I believe that the foundation of a compassionate society must be strong, universal access to high quality palliative care and end-of-life care. When people are properly supported, when pain is managed, when families are helped, and when the highest standard of care is available close to home, the fear and desperation that often drive these debates are significantly reduced. And if assisted dying were to become available on the NHS, it would raise important questions already being asked by professionals in palliative care and across the health system about our priorities for health care. Access to compassionate, properly resourced end-of-life care should never become the secondary option. So, can I ask the Minister to set out how government will reduce the postcode variation, strengthen community and out-of-hours provision, provide stable funding frameworks, particularly for hospices, and ensure workforce development is prioritised. Because this is not an abstract policy area. It's about whether, at the most vulnerable point in someone's life, the system is fragmented and reactive, or calm, coordinated and compassionate. We owe it to patients and their families to get this right.
Hear, hear.
Marie Rimmer. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to thank my friend, the Honourable Member for York Central, for securing this vital debate today. Her knowledge and understanding and compassion for people is just outstanding. It just cannot be matched. Most people, when they are seriously ill, want to be at home, want to be surrounded by the people that love them and that they love. I know this very personally from my own family's experience. When my mother was dying, we were told she had only a short time to live. She lived another 22 days. And during those 22 days, her hand was never left unheld by one of her children. Not once was she left alone. We laughed, we talked, and we were able to be there with her. That experience stayed with me and all my family, and we treasure it. But not everyone has that support. Some people reach the end of their lives alone and we have a duty as a society to care for them too. This is one of the reasons I later helped in the work to establish Willowbrook Hospice in St Helens. Like many hospices, Willowbrook was created by the community itself. It was founded in 1993 by people like me who believed that families in our area deserve the same compassionate end-of-life care as anywhere else. Today, it is a wonderful place with beautiful surroundings and gardens and care that focuses on comfort, dignity and compassion and care for the family and friends. It is rated outstanding by the Cheshire and Merseyside ICB and provides short-term inpatient care for people with complex need, alongside outreach outpatients, therapy and education services. Since opening its doors, it has supported more than 10,000 patients and now receives over 1,000 referrals each year. Hospices exist to care for the individual person and the families even. They give people a choice about where and how they spend the final part of their lives. They allow people to be treated not simply as patients, but as people, surrounded by family and friends, supported with compassion and dignity, and cared for in a way that recognises the humanity of those at the end of life. But the reality is that hospices, as charities, are under enormous financial pressure. At Willowbrook, around 30% of funding comes from the ICB. The remaining 70% must be raised locally. This comes from 10 charity shops in St Helens and Knowsley, from donations and from the occasional legacy gift, and of course the sponsored walk. It costs £3.8 million each year just to run the inpatient unit alone. In community that is not particularly affluent, raising that level of funding year after year is incredibly challenging. The hospice is currently facing a large deficit. If this pattern continues, it could be forced to close within 5 years. The annual increase from the ICB is 2.2 last year, 2.3 this year, but it's dependent upon efficiency savings. If it does not keep pace with inflation and are confirmed to the hospices very late, partway through the year, forcing the hospice to set its budget without certainty. In truth, it's operating on a knife edge. The solution must be fairer funding. A patient who is medically fit for discharge, but where there is no care package at home available, there's no criteria to reside. The hospital is there for patients receiving treatment. It's like there is no place here. And there, you really are. And not many people know this. It's only when you get to that stage. There is no ready solution for people at the end of their lives if they're not receiving treatment in hospital and they've no home. So although we need the funding for this Willowbrook and NHS Nursing Pay Awards, they're not met. Yes. Staff and the NHS employees who can offer higher salaries, yet it's delivering NHS commission care. Funding must reflect that reality and should pay NHS rate for hospice staff. But we also need a wider reform. The government really must get down to facing our end-of-life crisis. It isn't good enough to finance the existing hospices, although such finance is needed. But a holistic infrastructure is needed to be developed. Hospices are only established where individuals have developed them. They're not equal everywhere. This means we need a clear national strategy for the end of life and palliative care, including a national service framework. Better data to understand where care is needed most, clear goals for improvement, and proper palliative training and resources for health and palliative care staff. Hospices like Willowbrook show what compassion and end-of-life care can look like. Many people want that at home and can be provided at home, I know. But without sustainable funding and coherent national approach, services like this cannot continue to do the extraordinary work that so many families depend on, and the staff in various homes, hospices provide as well. Thank you.
Ben Coleman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, the member for York Central, for calling this an absolutely vital debate. As my honourable friend for New Forest East did, I would like to talk about children. And I would like to start with Amy. Amy had Cockayne syndrome. That's a severe, fatal, multi-organ genetic disease. And she lived with it for 28 years. And for much of that time, her family felt utterly lost. They were navigating a health system that simply didn't know how to help them. What changed everything for her was a specialist NHS clinical service. When she got a coordinated team who understood her condition, who knew her, they became a genuine lifeline. And I met Amy's wonderful mother Jane and sister Louise this Monday at a rare disease day at St Thomas's Hospital, just across from here. And I must give my thanks to Dr. Sheila Mohammed and the Rare Diseases UK team, including Dr. Bob Sarkney, for a truly inspiring visit. And Jane told me when I met her that if this specialist service had existed for Amy when she was diagnosed at the age of 14, so much would have been different, so much would have been easier. So Amy's condition was rare, but her experience wasn't. There are 99,000 children in this country right now. There are babies and toddlers, teenagers who are living with life-limiting or life-threatening conditions. And their families are navigating the same fear, the same confusion, the same desperate need for someone to show up and know what to do. But too often, what they need just isn't there. Now, we've been talking recently in this House about the new government's very welcome SEND strategy, and that promises to end the battles that disabled children and their parents face to get the support they need. That's exactly right, but it must apply equally to palliative care. So what does that support look like? And already that's been touched on by my by the honourable member opposite. Children's palliative care, it's not just about death or bereavement. It runs from diagnosis to the end of life, sometimes from birth to early adulthood and beyond, and also, yes, into bereavement. But it's not about giving up. It's about making sure that however long a child has, and it may be many years, they can live their life and their families can live their lives as well as possible. And the Rare Diseases Centre at St Thomas's showed me what is possible when you get this right. Now, they call their multidisciplinary clinic a carousel. It's a nice phrase. Patients, it means, see every specialist they need in one appointment, rather than having to travel across the country, trailing from hospital to hospital over months. That's great when it exists, but the problem is that children's palliative care, as it's been touched on, children's palliative care is planned, funded, and provided inconsistently across the country. And this is confirmed by a report of the Independent Expert Panel's Evaluation of Palliative Care in England, which was published last November, and that was commissioned by the Health and Social Care Committee, which I have the honour of being a member of, along with my honourable friend here. And this report cites Together Short Lives, which has been mentioned is the leading UK charity that supports seriously ill children and their families. And they told the panel that over a quarter of families today feel poorly supported. And nearly 1 in 10 families feels altogether unsupported. And that also only a third of existing paediatric palliative care teams are properly staffed, despite what the NICE guidance says they should have as staffing. Now, I have to say, I'm very pleased the government response to this report has been encouraging. It commits to the modern service framework for palliative care, and it does acknowledge that it must improve services for children. And I can assure the Minister, and it comes as no surprise to her, that I and the Select Committee will be holding the government to that, and also will be holding integrated care boards to that across the country. Now, within the services for children who need palliative care, children's hospices have already been mentioned, and they stand out as an absolute beacon of what can be achieved. They're absolutely irreplaceable. They provide specialist nursing, symptom management, you get short breaks if you're an exhausted family, you get emotional and bereavement support. And I also hugely welcome the £80 million that the government has given to children's hospices over the next 3 years so that they can plan ahead more easily. But hospices are scattered geographically, and the fact is that most families access palliative care through the NHS. but the NHS isn't providing this care consistently. So what needs to improve? Well, I suggest 5 things need to improve so people get what they need where they need it. First of all, 24/7 care. Families are alone at the moment, 2 in the morning. They don't know who to call. But there have been pilots where hospices and NHS services work together and they provide round-the-clock care at home. It can be done. The NHS needs to adopt that model. Second, we have workforce issues. There are shortages of specialist nurses in paediatric palliative care. There are shortages of properly trained generalists. That's a systemic problem. So I look forward to the NHS workforce plan, looking forward to see that that will specifically address children's palliative care, among all the other things it's covering. Third, we need to consider neonatal palliative care, and neonatal deaths account for 41% of all childhood deaths. I had the unforgettable experience just before Christmas of visiting Chelsea and Westminster Hospital in my constituency, of visiting their neonatal unit. Since 2015, that has run a most extraordinary national neonatal palliative care programme. That means it's on track to have trained every neonatal network in the UK from Chelsea Westminster Hospital by 2029. And there's been a remarkable partnership there between the NHS, between CW+, which is the hospital's charity, and the True Colours Trust. So I want the NHS to keep going with that. Fourth, we have patient groups. Their work can be clinical. Their work working together with the NHS can be life-saving. They need to be recognised and funded. And fifth and final point, as the NHS England is abolished, we need to protect the roughly 80 highly specialised, not just specialised, highly specialised services on which the rarest and most complex cases depend. And that means, as NHS England goes, we need a national commissioner, I suggest, with the authority both to fund these services nationally and to step in when local pressures threaten them. So I've set out a number of examples. There are good examples and there is real proof of what can work when the system wraps around families. Amy didn't get that from the start. Jane told me how different things could have been if she had. So in future, what I hope is that we can make sure that every Amy, every one of those 99,000 children gets the palliative care that they need.
Paulette Hamilton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my honourable friend, the member for York Central, who I love dearly, I must say, for leading this important debate. Madam Deputy Speaker, palliative care is about dignity. I saw the value of this care every day during my 25 years as a nurse in the health service. I still see it now, representing my Birmingham-Erdington constituency, particularly through the experience of John Taylor Hospice, which is now part of Birmingham Hospice. John Taylor is a beacon of compassion. My constituents consistently tell me how the hospice supported them and their loved ones through the most difficult moments of their lives. But like so many hospices across the country, it is a charity, heavily dependent on voluntary contributions. And when donations dry up, it is patients and families who pay the price. Despite providing an outstanding service, in 2024, John Taylor was forced to reduce inpatient beds and cut the equivalent of 45 full-time roles, 14% of its workforce. That means losing specialist nurses. It means losing the staff who hold the hands of the dying. That is the human cost of financial uncertainty. I welcome the government's recent funding of £100 million in capital for hospices and the £26 million per year for children palliative care. And I'm glad Birmingham Hospice has successfully accessed over 1.1 million from that funding. But Madam Deputy Speaker, we must be honest with ourselves. A one-off grant is simply a short-term sticking plaster. Palliative care cannot survive on a diet of gap-filling and bake sales. It cannot be sustained by charity alone.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can I take my honourable friend up the M6 from Birmingham to Newcastle-under-Lyme and through her pay tribute to the wonderful Dougie Mack Hospice. For many years they've served people in Newcastle-Lyme and Stoke-on-Trent and across North Staffordshire. They're committed, they're caring, they're compassionate, and they deserve a shout-out in this debate today.
Can I thank my honourable member? I am sure that every member in this room has a local hospice who they really appreciate and they cannot do without. So thank you for giving your local hospice a shout out, and I'm sure they'll appreciate it. Hear, hear. But Madam Deputy Speaker, we must be honest with ourselves. A one-off grant is simply a short-term sticking plaster. Palliative care cannot survive on a diet of gap filling and cake and bake sales. It cannot be sustained by charity alone. It is a core medical need and it requires core funding. Let us look at the numbers. It is estimated that in England and Wales by 2040, demand for palliative care is expected to increase by between 25 to 47%. We are heading towards a cliff edge, yet we are funding these services as if they're an optional extra. We must ensure that hospices receive proper reoccurring funding from the NHS and the government. Staff must be retained and patients must have equitable access to care. We need a long-term financial strategy so that no family in Birmingham or Erdington or anywhere else in this country suffers because services are cut back. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must also talk about access. Just as we have seen with GP appointments, accessing hospice care is becoming harder. If we cut beds and staff, we close the door on dignity. This brings me to the assisted dying bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am concerned that it is not clear where the funding for this new system will come from. If it is drawn from the same limited pot as palliative care, we risk starving the very services that provide the positive alternative, a death free from suffering. We need to close the door on that dilemma. We need hospices embedded not as a charity extras, but as a core partner in the NHS, funded for the long term and resourced to be there for everyone, because the people of Birmingham, Erdington and across this country deserve to live and die with dignity. Thank you.
Tom Collins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to add my thanks to my honourable friend, the member for York Central, for leading on this topic. I have seen palliative care fail. My mum, Alison, had ovarian cancer. She died lonely and in dreadful indignity in a hospital ward intended for recovering liver and kidney patients. She felt a burden to a nursing team who are used to people getting better. She was waiting for a hospice bed, but as it turns out, the waiting time was longer than she had. In my constituency of Worcester, we have hospices with superb facilities. Both Acorns Children's Hospice and St Richard's Hospice are loved institutions in our city. They're struggling, and it's vital that we support them. And clearly, we need more hospice capacity. But our deficiencies in palliative care are vast, and my lurking, uneasy suspicion is that many of them aren't hospice-shaped, but reflect deeper deficits across our NHS. I will.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. He raises a very important point about the NHS. In my limited experience, but painful experience, one of the things that doesn't happen enough is that even when there's a hospice bed available, the NHS staff do not refer end-of-life patients to the hospice because the palliative team is 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. Does he agree with me that we have to get to a point where that palliative support in our NHS is available 24/7 so that those referrals can take place?
Tom Collins.
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend for that point, and she's entirely right. We need far better integration across those services, and I was heartbroken to see that that the palliative care that my mother was receiving seemed to have been outsourced to charities and wasn't being provided by the NHS at all. And that specialist care ought to be something that's native to our NHS. I was recently talking to a couple of GPs in Worcester. Now, speaking with them is a refreshing change. While their work is in diagnosing and treating illness and to a good extent preventing it and promoting healthy lives, for them, palliative care is not an exception, it's Monday. With an ageing population, end-of-life care is really an emerging flavour in medical care. Bodies do not last forever, and the balance of benefits of treatment versus the very human costs in pain, inconvenience and indignity start to change. Medics dealing with palliative care understand that our bodies are intermingled complex systems, and that our bodies are one part of what we are, complex, intermingled, physical, psychological, social and spiritual beings with rich tapestries of relationships, values, perspectives and experiences. See the problem, name the problem, fix the problem, just doesn't cut it as an approach. You treat the whole person, or you risk mistreating them. Sadly, our urgent and acute systems of diagnosis and treatment are simply not designed for this approach. Palliative care is, by and large, out of mind and out of scope. Care is siloed into specialties. Patients become units of flow. Relationships are substituted out for transactions. This is reflected in the stories I hear from constituents in Worcester. Stories from people with multiple complex conditions who are locked in the flip-flop between specialisms, where alternately one gets managed well and the other slips into neglect. Stories of people who feel unheard, unvalued and anonymously shipped to different hospitals in different areas under different trusts. Or stories of people who, when their wellness takes a dip, do everything they can to avoid calling an ambulance and the inevitable prodding, poking and long cold night in A&E corridors that inevitably follows. This has to change. Addressing our gaps in palliative care demands a fundamental shift in the way our NHS thinks and works. There will be a place for the cut and shut quick surgical procedure here and there, a course of antibiotics, or a cast, sling and a suggestion not to do it again. But the primary role of healthcare needs to be one that sees the human being and works in relationship for their well-being. In fact, best practice in palliative care is often remarkably similar to treatment for recovery, setting small, achievable goals and working with patients to fulfil them. An NHS informed by this approach would most likely be more effective across the board. With that foundation, the opportunities for a better, more holistic and properly resourced approach to palliative care can start to open up. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to touch on the topic of assisted dying. I've found that a difficult debate to navigate, largely for the reasons I've discussed. The overwhelming message I've heard from medics and professionals is that we need to improve the way we navigate the end of life as things stand today, break the taboo of death, and develop care that meets the practical, physical, psychological, spiritual and social needs of parents and their families, and make this available to all. As we do this, treatments that shorten but enhance life will undoubtedly play a role, but they must sit at the apex of well-developed practice in end-of-life care that we don't yet have. This should be a major and urgent priority for us, not least because a drive towards excellent palliative care can only improve our systems and approaches overall. Dealing better with complex needs, putting patients' perspectives at the centre of system design, and plugging gaps so that patients are no longer able to fall through them. By taking proper ownership of palliative care, we can end experiences like my mum's. And in doing so, we will also make a better NHS.
Mary Glindon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm very that this is it demonstrates that this is a topic of deep personal importance to me, to many of us here in the chamber, as well as many of our constituents. But it took a private member's bill on assisted dying to bring the debate on palliative care into the foreground. And whilst I'm relieved it's now getting more attention it deserves, this has been needed for far too long. And I want to take this opportunity to commend in the strongest possible terms my honourable friend, the member for York Central. She rose to that necessity and convened the brightest minds in their respective fields to think about how palliative care could be different. Thank you. Yeah. It's a necessity that is not, that it's a necessity isn't an overstatement. And as my honourable friend said, the new New research commissioned by Marie Curie shows that almost 1 in 3 dying people have unaddressed symptoms and concerns and limited or no access to GP services. This is a system in crisis where demand for specialist palliative care is set to increase significantly. People in the UK are living longer lives with complex needs, and this is a mounting pressure on services which are already patchy and under strain. According to a widely cited study published in BMC Medicine, by 2040, the demand for specialist palliative care services could increase by 42%. For those who access specialist palliative care, a referral can be an incredibly daunting experience. People are forced to stare their life-limiting illness directly in the face. Patients often take each day as it comes, and before they know it, they face forms and terminology they have never encountered before. I welcome the government's commitment to develop a palliative care and end-of-life care modern service framework. This will be the first such national plan in 2 decades. As part of this strategy, I hope the Minister will look closely at the practical support provided to patients and families as they navigate referral. It can be a minefield, and people must feel confident that their care plan is right for them. I hope the government will seize the opportunities of the forthcoming NHS workforce plan. The sharp rise in demand which lies ahead of us must be met by a resilient and comprehensive workforce. Making the shift from hospital to community will require investment in general practice, community and district nursing, and specialist palliative care professionals. I would be grateful if the Minister could set out whether palliative care services will be a key component of the workforce plan. The Palliative and End-of-Life Care Commission underlines the hard yards we need to do on training. It highlights that lack of training available to clinicians in undergraduate and postgraduate programmes is leading to poor confidence and competencies in knowing how best to engage in care planning conversations. It is crucial to note that it is not just specialists that have a vital role to play. Palliative and end-of-life care must become a compulsory part of training for all health and social care workers. Greater health literacy in this area would also improve earlier identification. Not only would this improve outcome for patients, but it would also reduce costs for our broader health system. Given these clear opportunities, will the Minister commit to implementing mandatory training for all health and social care staff in undergraduate programmes from September this year? Will she also commit to ongoing and specialist level training for those already part of our NHS workforce? Madam Deputy Speaker, we must thank all those who currently work in the palliative care world because their work is nothing short of awesome. And in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I wish to end my speech with a reflection on what must be our overarching focus. A person is no more vulnerable than when they are told their life will come to an end. For occasions when nature makes that choice, we must enable people to maximise the precious time they have left. Today, too many people are not afforded that opportunity, and I urge the Government to be bold as it sets a new direction for palliative and end-of-life care.
Liam Conlon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I start by thanking my honourable friend, the member for York Central, for bringing this debate to the Chamber today. Discussions around assisted dying have divided this House, yet one impact we can all agree on is the prominence it's given to palliative care, and that is incredibly welcome. Whilst I'll come on to discuss policy and funding in a minute, in the words of Dame Cicely Saunders, the founder of the modern hospice movement, palliative care is about more than just bricks and mortar, and it is this that I'd like to begin with. Many of the benefits of proper palliative care and hospice support are not easily quantified and certainly can't be captured on a balance sheet. At St Christopher's Hospice in my constituency, established by Dame Cicely, there is a real focus on living fully until the end of life, as well as for allowing time for spiritual reflection and reconciliation at the end of life. St Christopher's was the first modern hospice in the world to combine medical care, research and teaching for end-of-life patients. Every family in Beckenham-on-Penge has been touched by St Christopher's Hospice, and speaking to them about the care their loved ones have received, you truly begin to understand the meaning of holistic care. In one example, patients are given access to a specialist adapted gym and physiotherapists where the focus is on retaining practical movements to maximise quality of life. In another, St Christopher's invites outpatients into the hospice for art classes and therapies, providing them with community and enjoyment, but also ensuring that the hospice is a familiar and safe place, meaning a more comfortable experience should they become an inpatient at the hospice at some point in the future. And this care extends beyond patients and to the families themselves. St Christopher's offers bereavement support for families after a death, as well as encouraging conversations towards the end of life, which facilitate reconciliation, honesty, and peace. And you see it in the impact and enthusiasm of our community in supporting St Christopher's Hospice through various fundraising events throughout the year. It is so important that these benefits, as well as the savings that hospices can generate for the NHS, are recognised by the government. But we know that recognition alone is not enough. The number of people with palliative care needs is projected to rise significantly over the next 25 years, putting more pressure on a system already squeezed. By 2048, Marie Curie estimates that the number of people with palliative care needs will be 25% higher than what it was in 2023. We also have a postcode lottery for palliative care in this country. Because the hospice movement grew organically over the decades, locations were not planned to provide even access. Where a person lives should never determine the dignity of their death or access to the support I laid out earlier. Even in one place, significant disparities exist between groups too. The barriers to accessing care are unacceptably high for ethnic minority communities and those living in poverty. A lack of culturally tailored care, language barriers, and a historical disconnect between some communities and traditional hospice services mean that many families carry the burden of end-of-life care entirely alone, unaware of the holistic support they are entitled to. We need providers and the government to begin to address this. And I'm glad the government have begun to relieve some of these problems. For example, through last year's announcement of record funding, a £100 million boost for adult and children's hospices, including £1.6 million for St Christopher's, the biggest investment into end-of-life care in a generation, it has enabled and supported the construction of Nuffield Ward at St Christopher's, which is the first of 3 wards to be refurbished. And I was incredibly proud to visit the hospice in December, along with the Health Secretary, to officially open the ward. Going forward, I would like to ask the government to continue in the spirit of this recent success. As Steve Smith, the Chief Executive of St Christopher's, said, following the latest funding announcement, whilst this investment is deeply appreciated and has already helped modernise facilities, it cannot stand on its own. We must ensure the long-term sustainability of our hospice sector. I therefore fully welcome the news that the government is developing a palliative care and end-of-life care modern service framework for England, and unbelievably, this will be the first national plan for this vital care to be delivered since 2008. Speaking to friends at St Christopher's and Hospice UK, I know there is a real desire to engage with ministers to shape this vision, to meet the government's own ambitions in the 10-year health plan of shifting care out of hospitals and into the community. This framework must commit to a fairer, long-term funding model. I will do.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making a really important speech and I'm enjoying it, as I'm sure others are. But he's just set out the challenges facing the palliative care system in our country. I wonder if he agrees with me that rather than proceeding with an assisted dying changes with bringing assisted dying in that would only make the challenges he set out worse, the resources, the effort, the time of civil servants, the NHS and all of us should be focused on getting a palliative care system fit for the 21st century rather than bringing a change from zero to hero.
I do, and I agree. And I agree with him. And you know, having a postcode lottery does not offer people a real choice when it comes to palliative care either, and that's the point I made during that debate. Crucially, it must also address the regional and socio-economic inequalities that plague the system, so that across the whole country, people can access the high-quality, compassionate provision of palliative care that I know my constituents value so dearly at St Christopher's. And finally, let me finish by thanking all the trustees, the staff and volunteers at St Christopher's Hospice for caring for families with unrivalled professionalism, dedication and empathy. Dame Cicely said, "You matter because you are you, and you matter to the end of your life. We will do all we can not only to help you die peacefully, but also to live until you die." She would be incredibly proud of the staff and volunteers at St Christopher's Hospice today, whose work enables that to happen. Thank you.
Brian Leishman.
Good afternoon, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to start off by thanking my honourable friend from York Central for bringing this debate and for all the campaigning that she does She's a force for getting palliative care the funding that it truly needs.
Yeah.
Laura and Keith Turner and their daughter Kate are at the heart of the community spirit that makes Sauchie such a special place. The Turners shared the story of their son, Kate's younger brother Callum, who was just 16 when diagnosed with Burkitt lymphoma. No family should face what the Turners did with Callum's illness. When the Turners were told that no more could be done, Callum made the decision that he wanted to pass away somewhere familiar, at home. The family did everything they could to make Callum's final days comfortable and as peaceful as possible. But the Turners experienced a system designed for adults. District nurses and adult hospice services, as dedicated as they are more equipped to care for elderly patients, not a 16-year-old boy. The sensitivity and understanding required for a young person at that stage of life is very different from that of someone in their later years. And while Callum had the bravery, attitude and confidence of an adult, he was still a child. Traumatically, the Turners waited more than 7 hours for morphine and were negatively judged for taking the decision to bring Callum home. But that changed when children's hospices across Scotland became involved. Chas nurses brought dignity and understanding. They listened. They treated Callum as a young person, not as a patient. And crucially, they allowed his family to stop being carers and simply be mum, dad and a loving sister in those precious final days. Families deserve a system which recognises that young people at the end of life are individuals with a very different set of unique needs. So, to the Government Minister, please listen to Callum's story and further invest in palliative care so other families don't find themselves in the same position as Laura, Keith and Kate did. There's not a pounds and pence figure in any budget that can be put on giving families the very best treatment and comfort possible at the time that they need it most.
Yeah.
Josh Newbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by paying tribute to my honourable friend, the member for York Central, for securing this debate, but more importantly, her work and advocacy on palliative care throughout her whole time in this House. Last August, I visited St Giles Hospice in Whittington, just over the border in the Lichfield constituency, a visit that I'm hugely grateful for. It's a hospice that is so well loved by my constituents, not least of all from the thousands of people who fundraise for them every year. We often judge our health services by how they treat illness, but the test of a good health service is also how it supports people when treatment is no longer the answer. The people I met at St Giles were doing extraordinary, skilled work. Their day-to-day is managing complex symptoms whilst at the same time turning to steady a husband or reassure a daughter. That balance of clinical excellence and guiding family and friends as their loved one's life nears its end showcases the immense skill that those nurses, doctors and support staff possess. At St Giles, I met their CEO, Eleanor Eustace, and saw the fruits of recent funding that they've had from the government and from the Francis and Eric Ford Charity Trust, which enabled them to create a new family lounge. That space gives people the chance to spend time with their loved ones away from their room, including cooking up a storm in the kitchen, nattering over a brew, or playing in the children's area, because heartbreakingly, St Giles is seeing more and more terminally ill people who have young children. But like all hospices, they face stark financial challenges. With only around a third of hospice funding coming from the NHS, the vast majority must be raised from donations, sponsorships and legacies. Whilst hospices fiercely defend their charitable mission and independence from the NHS, it's clear that they have a close relationship and always will, so public funding is critical. Having listened to hospices and the families who've relied on their world-class care, it's clear to me that the funding model for palliative care needs a major shake-up. In particular, the recognition of the costs that hospices face. At St Giles, Eleanor told me that whilst hospices aren't bound by NHS pay scales, terms and conditions, they have to keep up with them or they'll lose many of their staff. And they want to recognise the outstanding care that their highly skilled workforce provide. But the reality is the payments they get from the NHS often don't keep pace with increasing costs, squeezing them tighter and tighter year on year. I know this is the same story for many other hospices that serve my constituency, like Acorns and the WWII. A stark example of this pressure can be seen at St Giles, where a third of their beds are currently closed due to funding constraints, most definitely not because of a lack of demand or need. In previous years, this spare capacity has been given over to the NHS to help with winter pressures. Any honourable members who've worked in the NHS will know that extra capacity is essential in the cold winter months. However, the amount paid for relatively lower level care than St Giles typically offer meant that the hospice made a loss on those beds, so donations were effectively subsidising NHS care, so sadly that arrangement had to be stopped. And I think on this side of the House, we have to be honest that chief among the cost pressures faced by hospices in the last year has been the increase of employers' national insurance contributions, which has cost St Giles £400,000. I continue to believe that given the vital role they play for people at a critical time in life and the pressures they take off the NHS, hospices should be exempted from this increase. To continue not to do so will continue to restrict the availability of end-of-life care and cost the NHS more in the long run. Like many in the chamber today, I devoted lots of time to the assisted dying debate, poring over heart-wrenching letters, speaking with constituents and professionals on both sides of the argument. That debate showed me, whatever your view, that we need far more focused discussion and funding for care at the end of life. When hospices have to cut their services, the people who need them don't just disappear. Instead, they go to the NHS, or they become one of the quarter of people who could benefit from specialist end-of-life care but never receive it. With stable long-term funding that reflects the full cost of specialist services, hospices can not only maintain their services but also expand their role in meeting growing demand and the various challenges ahead of us. We all deserve a good death, but many of us don't get that. That must change. It can change. And I look forward to working with everyone in this chamber and the incredible people providing palliative care to ensure that it does change. Thank you.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The hospice sector in Scotland is under severe and growing financial pressure, with 2/3 of hospices making cuts or planning to do so in the near future. This is due to underfunding that's left hospices stretched to breaking point, with many being forced to cut services at a time when they are needed more than ever. Nowhere is this reality clearer than in my constituency of Western Bartonshire. My constituency is home to Scotland's oldest and largest hospice, St Margaret of Scotland Hospice, and Chas Robin House, which provides specialist care to babies, children and young people with life-limiting conditions. I note the findings of the Independent Palliative Care Commission, and I strongly support its call for a comprehensive specialist palliative care service that is properly funded, accessible to all and available from the point of terminal diagnosis or advanced chronic illness. That vision reflects what families in my constituency need and deserve. St Margaret's has served generations of families in Western Bartonshire and beyond, and I want to thank the formidable and irreplaceable stewardship of Sister Rita Dawson and her team of wonderful staff and volunteers. St Margaret's is currently undertaking a £6 million refurbishment project, and this work is almost complete, but there remains a funding shortfall. So far, all of the money has been raised through donations and fundraising efforts. Modernisation is urgently needed to ensure patients receive care in dignified, therapeutic surroundings fit for the 21st century, yet the hospice continues to face a funding gap. At the same time, Robin House provides extraordinary children's palliative care to families facing the unimaginable. Its services embody precisely what the Commission describes: holistic, speculative care that extends beyond the patient to the whole family, including bereavement support. But like adult hospices, it relies heavily on charitable income alongside statutory funding, and that does not always reflect the true cost of delivery. I understand that the findings of the Commission are related to England specifically as part of the Government's 10-year NHS plan. I welcome the fact that the UK Government has committed significant investment in hospice and palliative care services in England as part of our long-term health planning. That funding recognises that palliative care is an essential part of our healthcare system for those receiving end-of-life care and their families. But having spoken to representatives from hospices in Western Bartonshire, it is clear there has been very little indication of help which was promised under the Scottish Government's palliative care strategy announced last September. Hospices in my constituency are struggling, they deserve clarity and transparency on where this much-needed funding is. Western Bartonshire has some of the highest levels of health inequality in Scotland. That makes equitable access to specialist palliative care even more critical. A postcode should not determine the quality of someone's final months, nor should hospices be left dependent on community fundraising to complete essential building works while additional public funding sits elsewhere, somewhere in devolved budgets. So I ask the Minister, given the capital and revenue investment announced for palliative care in England, has she held discussions with her Scottish counterpart to ensure that Barnett consequentials are properly reflected in Scotland's approach to hospice funding? In particular, will the Scottish Government set aside their Barnett share of the capital for hospice building improvement works announced by this UK Government, and will she commit to continuing engagement to ensure the vision set out by the Independent Palliative Care Commission is realised not just in one part of the United Kingdom, but across all of it? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Dr. Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for York Central, for having this important debate, and I'd like to pay tribute to her political expertise in this area and for everything that she has done. Now, Dame Cicely Saunders, much quoted in this debate, understood that medicine... Dame Cicely was the founder of the movement, of the hospice movement in this country. She understood that medicine is not only about curing illnesses, it's about the dignity and ensuring that people are supported compassionately at the most vulnerable moment of their lives. Yeah. And it was her work that transformed how we think about care at the end of the life. And today, hospices all over the country continue that legacy. And in my own work as an ear, nose and throat surgeon dealing with patients with advanced cancers in the head and neck, I am well aware of the importance of hospices. I'd like also at this moment to pay tribute to Dr. Eric Wilkes, who was a brilliant general practitioner and a founder of the hospice movement in Sheffield. He was one of my teachers and one of the first people to understand the importance of integrating end-of-life care into community and hospital settings at St. Luke's Hospital. Now, the term palliative care was actually only invented in 1990, some 20 years or so after I first met Dr. Wilkes. And it was the Sheffield model that was completely crucial to this development. Now, I'd just like to say something about the palliative care in my own constituency of Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket, and in particular, the remarkable work of St Nicholas's Hospices, the wonderful Chief Executive Linda McKenhill and all of her staff. Now, the hospice provides essential support for those approaching the end of life, for their families and for their loved ones. Now, what makes this hospice a little bit unusual is that it sits right on the campus of the West Suffolk Hospital, an arrangement which facilitates help for the patients in the hospice from all the services within the hospital. So, for example, if a patient falls and fractures a leg or needs an ear surgeon, then support is available rapidly and nearby. Most hospices simply don't have access to that level of clinical support, and that is a real advantage for the Bury St Edmunds Hospice. Now, St Nicholas's Hospice also illustrates a wider challenge which faces palliative care across the whole country. As we know, demand for hospice services is increasing. St Nicholas's lately increased its capacity by about 33%. And that was to meet the needs of the patients and families in the local community. But in order to do this, we have to recruit more staff. And so we must do something about increasing training capacity across the hospice service. And in particular, because we need to make sure that we have a 7-day service. If we need to increase the service from a 5-day service to a 7-day service, we need 2/7 more people. So palliative care is a crucial part of a healthcare system. The problem, as we have heard on many occasions, is that the hospices are relying on charity and legacies. Now that is obviously admirable, but it raises an important question, which is, I think, first asked by the Baroness Finlay in the other place. Now, we do not expect a maternity service to require charitable funding. If we needed a new maternity service, we would expect the NHS to put that up. Yet, for some reason, if we need a hospice, we expect a charity to raise the funds to do that and run it. Yet being born and coming to the end of your life are just an inevitable part of life. So I think we need a paradigm shift, a philosophical change in the way we think about palliative care, which must be regarded as a core part of our National Health Service. Now, if we genuinely believe that dignity at the end of life matters, then let's do that. Let's make palliative care core. Thank you.
Yeah. Which brings us to the front bench contributions. Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to begin by thanking all the honourable members for their thoughtful and moving contributions this afternoon. In particular, the honourable members for Worcester and St Helens South and Whiston, who spoke so movingly about their own very personal loss. But of course, we wouldn't be here holding this debate were it not for the honourable member for York Central, who set out the frame of this debate so brilliantly and has done so much work outside this chamber to strive for better palliative care. The honourable member for York Central concluded her remarks by talking about bereavement support, and that is where I want to begin. Because last week I was out in Burgess Hill and I saw an elderly gentleman holding onto a walking frame, standing by the edge of the pavement. And I got talking to him, and it turned out that he was waiting for a lift to St Peter and St James Hospice, where he was going to a bereavement cafe. And he told me that he'd lost his wife 2.5 years ago, but he had no recollection of the first 2 years following her loss. I think it had been a blur for him. But for the last 6 months, he's been going back to St Peter and St James for this bereavement cafe, and he's beginning to feel a little better with that support each week. So my thanks go to St Peter and St James and for all the hospices that support our constituents for what they are doing. We are at a point where our palliative care system is at a tipping point, with a funding cliff edge approaching 75% of hospices are running a deficit. 2 in 5 are planning reductions in clinical services in the year ahead. And across England, 380 hospice beds lie empty. Not because there is no need for them, as many honourable members have said, but because there is not the funding to staff them. Around 300,000 people a year are cared for by hospices, yet around 100,000 more, 1 in 3 of those who need hospice care miss out. And demand is rising sharply. Over the next decade in England, just over 5.75 million people will die. Around 90% of them, an estimated 5.18 million people, will have palliative care needs. New research commissioned by Marie Curie and published earlier this month showed us that nearly 1 in 3 dying people had both unaddressed symptoms and concerns and insufficient access to GP services at the end of life. That equates to nearly 1 person dying with unmet needs every 3 minutes. Without intervention, around 44,400 more people are projected to have unmet palliative care needs in 2050 compared to 2025. That is the scale of the challenge before us. Hospices are essential pillars of our health and care system, especially at a time when the NHS is under such immense strain. The economic case for funding them properly is overwhelming, though. Approximately 15% of all emergency